listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And good morning once again, everybody. It is July 28th. It's a Wednesday, and it's just after 7 a.m. Eastern. Let's get into the COVID headlines first up. About 108,775 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday. There were also about 406 new deaths. Over the past week, these new cases leave us with an average of about 63,248 cases per day. That's an increase of 145%, well over a doubling from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 57% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,603,433 people across the United States and killed 611,000 of us, just over that, in fact. The CDC has released new mask guidance, recommending that both the unvaccinated and the vaccinated wear masks. We have Jen Psaki in a clip here explaining the sudden turnabout. Let's play this clip, Andre.
Today, they're changing their guidance. They're changing their advice to the American public, their public health advice, based on evolving data and an evolving historical guidance. That virus. That's exactly what they should be doing.
What is your message to Americans who are feeling whiplash right now? Why should they trust the same group of health officials who just 2 months ago told them they don't have to wear a mask anymore inside?
Because our goal is to save their lives. And our responsibility and the responsibility of public health officials is to continue to provide updated guidance.
There we go. And we'll come back to this later just briefly. We have spent so much time talking about this already. But Jen Psaki and Joe Biden and the rest of the White House crew, and practically, you can include Fauci, you can include many members of the CDC, the World Health Organization, more broadly, could have explained this so much better and been so much more consistent. And filled in the lines that people are having to fill in for themselves, where people are reading between, trying to assume, what the administration and the worldwide health team, medical team responding to this stuff, where exactly they're coming from. And so much trust has already been burnt that even if they were to spell it out in ABC's the most crystal clear fashion possible, I still don't think they could regain that trust. But that's where they should be going. And sadly, all she really just said there was things have changed. And their recommendation has changed, science updates, etc., which is true in an abstract sense, but it doesn't actually help to fill the gap. In national news, yesterday the House Select Committee on the January 6th riot conducted its first meeting. Some of the key takeaways include tearful testimony from the police and a promise coming from one of the Republican members saying that, quote, every minute, end quote, of Trump's actions on January 6th will be investigated. Also, not just tearful police, tearful politicians. And arguably some crocodile tears. Here, we have a couple of clips. Let's go to Adam Kinzinger. Andre.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee. Thank you to our witnesses. I never expected a day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. I think it's important to tell you right now, though, you guys may, individually feel a little broken. You guys all talk about the effects you have to deal with, and, you talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. Democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days. How we take accountability for that.
And there we go. Again, I'll come back on this. We have another clip, though, I want to go straight to. We have Adam Schiff also speaking here. Again, quick to tear up. We'll hear this. Andre, let's play Adam Schiff here.
I'd like to think, as Amanda Gorman so eloquently said, that we're not broken, we're just unfinished. Because if we're no longer committed to a peaceful transfer of power after our elections. If our side doesn't win, then God help us. If we deem elections illegitimate merely because they didn't go our way, rather than trying to do better the next time, then God help us. And if we're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors, if they're born in another country or they don't look like us, then God help us. But I have faith because of folks like you. And Adam, I didn't expect this would be quite so emotional either, but it must be an Adam thing today. But I'm so grateful to all of you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
It's an Adam thing today. That's a particularly self-aware or maybe self-centered on the part of Adam Schiff there. We'll come back to this, but we got a bunch more headlines to get through, so let's get through them. Continuing on with national news, the Oakland City Council voted Monday to open a co-governed homeless encampment to provide shelter for 40 people in West Oakland. That makes it potentially the second site that residents and service providers would operate together. In international news, Antony Blinken in India said he was worried Afghanistan would become a pariah state under the Taliban. Yet, no crap, Sherlock. I can't say the actual thing that comes to mind, but you get the point, Jamarl. We kind of could have expected this to happen in pretty much exactly this fashion, by the way, like 2 decades ago. Usually it's hard to predict things, but this is one of those things that's easier to predict. Continuing on, French President Emmanuel Macron says that France owes French Polynesia a debt for over 200 nuclear tests that were conducted in the region, the country, over 3 decades with more than 1,000 people reportedly affected by the fallout from those nuclear tests. In Olympic news, Simone Biles will not compete in tomorrow's all-around competition where she was expected to defend her gold from 2016. This comes after she withdrew in the middle of team competition yesterday, leaving the Americans in second as the Russian athletes took gold. Biles has stated that she needs to focus on her mental health, and the pressure of being the world's best, quote-unquote, is extremely heavy. Katie Ledecky won the gold medal in the 1,500-meter freestyle rebounding from her 5th place finish in the 200 freestyle. U.S. men's basketball team also bounced back from their loss to France by destroying Iran by 54 points, led by Damian Lillard's 21 points. And so far for the Olympics, the medal leaders in order are the United States, China, Japan, Russia, Russian athletes, and Australia. However, Japan has the most gold with 12, followed by China with 11, and the U.S. with 10. In business news, Activision Blizzard employees will be staging a walkout of the company for their attempts to combat the lawsuit against them in California. The company's lawyers blamed bureaucrats that are driving businesses out of the state by going after them in court like they are to Activision. Activision, again, has been accused of sexual harassment, like endemic, widespread sexual harassment in the company. Regarding the hostile work environment and sexual misconduct accusations, the claims represent a, quote, distorted and untrue picture of our company, end quote. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There's another clip from the CDC mask-wearing guidance thing that we'll be playing later today. We played the Psaki clip on the American side, but I believe this is a CDC spokeswoman herself that you pulled.
Head of CDC.
We can't hear you, Jamarl.
Well, no, I was getting my mic straight. She's the head of the CDC. Her name is, let me pull her name. I gave it originally. But we'll come back to the clip in a few.
We will. Yeah, no, my point is we have more coming on that later.
I know you were going to. I don't know you're going to bring that up. Or just ask it.
No, totally. I guess my point bringing that up, not only, we're going to get to that later, but also I kind of wanted to come back on this. Jen Psaki.
Rochelle Walensky. She's the CDC director. Director of the CDC.
That is 100% right. That's one of those names. With the Jen Psaki clip, there's something I already kind of said my comment, but I wanted to throw it to you too. The way that she puts it, the way she's trying to explain the CDC recommendation.
Yeah. The whiplash effect.
Yeah, and she's trying to explain, okay, why is the advice suddenly changing? And in the process, she gives the generic explanation that's technically true, but doesn't actually do it for anybody, I don't think, which is, well, the science has changed. The science has shifted. Therefore, this has shifted, which is technically true, but that's like the umbrella explanation.
Yeah.
That everybody who already agrees with you is going to nod along and be like, yes, you're right. The science has changed. That makes perfect sense. We're in a different place now. More people are getting cases, therefore, and we know that people can get sick despite having the vaccine. They are already reading they're already reading the arguments in. They already know where you're coming from. Yeah. They don't need you to spell it out.
I don't think the science has changed.
They're on your side.
I think the science is what it said it was.
The situation has changed.
The situation has changed.
Yes.
There's a difference in those
things. The situation has changed.
You thought you were going to come in and you thought everybody had good sense enough to get the vaccine when the vaccine was available. You had no idea that there would be this entrenched political well, it's weird. There's an aspect of people who say, I don't trust it, I don't want it, etc. And you had no idea that those people were going to be like 40% of the population. There's that. You didn't know that there was going to be this huge safe space for it. There's that. And even though the perspective of the public is getting a little bit more, I guess you can say, ardent with the vaccinated, getting very annoyed with the unvaccinated, I don't think they came in thinking that there was going to be this many people that was going to be hesitant to get the vaccine. I think they saw 600,000 dead right there. That is going to be enough in and of itself. We're going to do our politics where we're going to have this thing where we're going to open up the government, et cetera, et cetera. They thought people were just going to do the right thing, quote unquote. I don't think they had any thought that they were going to be here.
I don't
where
think
they are.
But if they think that, I don't know, man. They got to prepare for contingencies because that's the most optimistic interpretation of how the chain of events are going to go.
It is 1,000% is. I agree with you. 1,000% agree with you.
And another point here.
Well, what's the contingency on this? That's the catch. I don't know the contingency.
Well, because the point is, if you prepare for those contingencies, then you might change your strategies across the board in ways that are going to benefit you. So, for instance, if you don't assume that everybody's just going to believe you and go along with your recommendations and everything, then you have to start thinking, okay, how am I going to convince people? What am I going to say to people that's going to make them want to do this?
They thought about that. They just got it wrong.
But if you do that over multiple iterations and you are like, okay,
if this doesn't work,
we have the internet. People are constantly going to be skeptical of us. They kind of don't believe us already. Trump showed us that there's this whole idea with fake news where a lot of people are just disenchanted and completely don't pay any attention to us. So how are we going to win those people over? So let's first recourse, let's insult them, kick them off of our social media platforms, and blame them for killing people. Which is maybe technically true, but you have blood on your hands too.
I think in their heads, they were going to say 600,000 people dead, et cetera. And to their credit, I think they thought that we were going to get the Faucis of the world to explain it. We are going to, I think that was their playbook. I don't think they ever thought they were going to be in a world where they would have to go back and say, okay, now we need you to put back on a mask. I don't think they ever thought they were going to be there because that's a horrible place to be. I mean, you've basically taken over responsibility from Trump after saying that he was a klutz, clown, all that stuff. And I agree with you. Trump got 400,000 people killed, if not more. Fair enough. Now, your job is to bring through the vaccinations and to shepherd this country through. And I think in their heads, they honestly thought, we're going to get Fauci to explain it. We're going to explain it. We're going to make the vaccines available. We're going to make the masks available. We're going to make sure that all the technical details that are available and necessary are there to the public. And we did that. And then it's like, all right, 49% vaccinations. Like, whoa, that number is not high enough. And it's like, okay, how do we get those people to switch? And I don't think they have an answer. And I think it's that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, all right, the science has changed. No,
that's not enough. That's not
the science.
That's not anything. Well, and maybe the science. Maybe, for instance, we do know more about the vaccines.
We know about the variants.
Yeah, there's new stuff like that. So maybe technically, but my point is they need to be a lot more specific. And even now, it's like throwing pearls before swine. They've already burnt so much of their trust. It's not like they can do anything to get it back. At least not this year or next year or anything like that. It's going to be a long time and under another president and probably another bureaucracy before people start to seriously.
I don't know if that's entirely true.
Seriously reinvest it.
Meaning if I think part of the problem is these guys, they keep going in one direction. And there's never this accounting that, hey, something is wrong and you guys need to account for that. And what I mean by that is, maybe you need a come to Jesus moment where the president comes out and addresses this directly. Meaning not just, okay, we're trying to get people to do vaccines, et cetera, and we're trying to do it by hook or by crook. Maybe there is this moment in America thing where the president needs to do in order to be like, look, we need to bring down the hostility. We need to bring down this back and forth. And this is a new moment of transparency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know whether it would work, but I do know that this and the way that they're going isn't working.
Wait, quick question.
Go for it.
Your monologue, are you planning on talking about the January 6th commission or something completely? Okay. So we can come back to that.
Yeah.
Because, we play clips in it. There's stuff I want to say.
And I have more clips.
But we only have, if we're going to be talking about it in our post-headlines banter here, we've only got like a couple seconds. Right. So anyway, with that, I think I might take us out so we can come back on that. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan's. We're going into a break and coming back, getting into another 2 3/4 hours this morning of our daily morning show. Specifically, though, we're going to be coming back in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue and a short back and forth on the January 6th commission. All over the news, splattered all over the news yesterday and some of the day before, too. With that, going into our break, we'll be right back, folks.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it? Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Whatever platform you're consuming this content on, you can give us a like and share the audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I had the opportunity to go through several of the clips of the January 6th commission, and of course, this is the commission, the select committee, that is investigating the January 6th, the breach upon the Capitol, the putsch attempt, as I like to call it. I don't think that the people who are raging the Capitol, at raiding the Capitol, in and of itself is a putsch attempt. I think it's the totality of it. It's the combination of it. It's Trump pushing the governor, pushing Pence to do something that is illegal, pushing the various people in the various states to do something illegal, combined with the, we're going to hang Mike Pence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This should be investigated. Honestly, legitimately, should be investigated. And it's sad that it seems to be breaking down upon, well, one side wants to investigate it. And look, whether you want to say one side wants to investigate it because they have all the political advantage and everything that they can make hay out of it, fair enough. But let's just be clear. One side does clearly want to investigate it, with the other side saying no dice. This wasn't the original way it turned out. You initially had a situation where the House and the Senate voted on these people to come together in what was supposed to be a bipartisan commission of Democrats and Republicans trying to figure out what happened. And this basically fell apart in the Senate. I watched as this took place, this show of pain and disgrace, one clip, one video after the next, where you would have Republicans that say it was a pleasant day. They were just great Americans. They were just strolling about. We don't see anything wrong. And this, of course, is contrasted by the reality of cops getting beat up and put into the hospital, fist fights taking place, where just violence. I couldn't even show many of the videos that I wanted to show because of the language and the violence and just people screaming and cursing, et cetera, et cetera. That was the pleasant day that we're being told about. This is the enterprise where the capital of the United States, democracy incarnate, and the symbolism of it all, of the representative government being attacked by people that are greatly bothered, clearly, and believing that the person who won the election actually lost it. It's an astonishing thing to watch. It's the disturbing thing to watch. And here we are. And so now when it comes to let's investigate this, I am one of those people that says, yes, this should be investigated. You should get to the bottom of this. You should determine whether or not anybody in Congress was working in tandem with this. If anybody in law enforcement, for that matter, was working in tandem with this. I mean, those are some of the allegations. And we know the FBI has a history of, let's say, goosing stuff along, even though I don't necessarily see anything here to put that point out. I'm just saying with the other revelations over the course of the last few weeks, then yeah, I don't necessarily think it's wrong to investigate that either. I'm saying that if you're going to have a legitimate January 6th commission or committee, whatever you want to call it, it has to look into all of it, not just one element or the next. I watched, and I think I just had this moment of sadness. This is something that is horrific for a country, and it has radical consequences going forward. This notion, and I'm going to play Adam Schiff's clip again, because his clip, I think, nails it for me. It nails it for me on 2 points. The sad hypocrisy of a man talking about if we can't accept who won the election, whereas he spent 3 years with one conspiracy after the next about Donald Trump and the Russians, et cetera, et cetera. Whether it's Trump hitting it right on, meaning hitting that rail about the election being fraudulent or stolen, or whether it's Adam Schiff coming up with one conspiracy theory after the next about how the Russians carried Trump across the finish line. There is a difference in those things. One is one is hitting it directly, the other is hitting it indirectly. But when you get around to the real core of it, it still boils down to one side not accepting the fact that they lost. And this seems to be the modus operandi going forward. And the pain, the tears that Adam Schiff is dredging up here, on some level are the tears of a nation for people like him who would use something like this to get across something that is actually real. The wild part about this to me was that the cops in this were real people. They were getting hit. They were getting beat up. They were getting put into the hospital, despite the fact that their pain is basically being used for the politics. That's the sad part. An event did happen. It was a tragic event. Will we get to the bottom of it? Not with this commission, unfortunately, despite the fact that the commission may be bringing up some things that are legitimate. Let's play Schiff's clip, just so people know what I'm talking about.
I'd like to think, as Amanda Gorman so eloquently said, that we're not broken, we're just unfinished. Because if we're no longer committed to a peaceful transfer of power after our elections, if our side doesn't win, then God help us. If we deem elections illegitimate merely because they didn't go our way, rather than trying to do better the next time, then God help us. And if we're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors, if they're born in another country or they don't look like us, then God help us. But I have faith because of folks like you. And Adam, I didn't expect this would be quite so emotional either, but it must be an Adam thing today.
Let's stop. I don't like men crying on TV, on camera. I just feel like it's theater. Not all the time, especially for Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff has spent the last several years screaming that Donald Trump lost the election, pushing through an investigation that basically turned up bupkis over the previous president. If we can't accept the fact that we lost, God help us. Yeah, Adam, I think you really need to pay attention to what you're saying here. If you can't accept the fact that you lost, God help us. And that means for the country, Shane and I talk about this all the time, this notion that one side has lost the ability to accept the fact that they lost. That's with them not accepting Merrick Garland in the Supreme Court. This is either with the whole thing with Donald Trump, or for that matter, with this election with Biden. This is a horrible turn of events in regards to a country that we're supposed to propagate towards. What does it look like when 30 and 40% of your country thinks that you're not the person who actually won the race? And let's go to the cops for a moment, because I want to get to the reality of it. Adam Schiff can sit here and say stuff like this. And yeah, there's a reality to it, despite the fact that Adam Schiff is radically hypocritical in saying it. The cops here are on some level the saddest part, because they were actually there. And it's what is being, it's like they're languishing in their misery of that particular day as a way of making this point that much more clear. Yes, there should be an investigation of it. No, this is not going to give us what we need. Let's play the clip for this one is Dunn, Harry Dunn.
Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are being lauded as courageous heroes. And while I agree with that notion, why? Because they told the truth? Why is telling the truth hard? I guess in this America, it is. Us four officers, we would do January 6th all over again. We wouldn't stay home because we knew it was going to happen. We would show up. That's courageous. That's heroic. So what I ask from you all is to get to the bottom of what happened. And that includes, like, I echo the sentiments of all of the other officers sitting here. I use an analogy to describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that. So, thank you.
Look, like I said, I agree with them. And that's the wild part. Listening to this hearing, and as I hear the testimony and everything else, I agree with the testimony. I agree that there was a Putsch attempt. I agree with all that. My issue with this is, it's not going to go down in the way that it needs to go down to get to the bottom of what took place, because what they're looking at is not going to try to do that, which means it's not going to be something that the entirety of the nation is going to accept. Let's hear the last part. This one is, this is Sergeant, I need to find the guy's name. But he is also making his point. I believe it's Fanone, but I could be wrong, but I need to verify.
I believe it's Gunnell.
Is it? That's it, Gunnell. So we have the sergeant, and he makes this comment about his wife, that he, at that moment, cared more about his country and defending the Capitol than his wife and kids. Let's play this clip.
After I took a shower, I spent about 10 minutes hugging her and my son. I told her I gotta get some sleep because I gotta go back to work. And she told me, no, you're not. You hurt. I said, no, I'm still able to continue to carry out my duties. And by 8 o'clock, I was already on my way back, despite her concerns and for my safety. My sense of duty for the country, for the Constitution, at that time was bigger than even my love for my wife and my son. I put that ahead. And for me, it's confounding that some people who have sworn oath, elected officials, including people in the military that I seen at the lower stairs fighting against me, they swore an oath and they're forgetting about that oath. They're not putting the country before the party. And that's what bothers me the most.
Right there.
Because I, as a former soldier, I know what that inherits, that oath. And I was willing, I'm still willing to do that. And you got people right now in front of the Justice Department asking to release some of the very same people to be released, even though we are testifying about the trauma and the agony, everything that happened to us.
Let's stop right there.
It's pathetic.
It is a slap in the face for any of these guys that either served, any of these guys that was, let's say, on the police force at the time, for them to see Congress members to basically turn around and say, nothing to see here, folks. It was just a warm walk in the park. I don't see the problem, etc. Oh, that is such a slap in the face. This is Sergeant Gunnell. And I have to be honest, I get him on some level, right? Like if I was there, if I was fighting, I am doing this basically under this notion of the Constitution, under this notion of my job. And then I see Congress members later on saying, yeah, nothing to see here, folks. Slap in the face. Totally get it. But I guess the issue here, and I guess my sadness here is Gunnell, Dunn, these guys are being honest in regards to like, this is our take. This is how we feel about it. We're feeling a certain degree of trauma and everything else. Politicians, however, different animals. Different animals. And it's like, yes, something happened. Yes, we should get to the bottom of it. Yes, it should be non-biased. It should be like a church committee or something like that, where the goal of it is just what happened. And we've hit the thing where, like Dunn said, truth is hard. Getting to the reality of it is hard. And you can even make a case that says, on some level, politically impossible in a way that the country would accept as legit. Yeah, this is a sad, sad thing to watch. At least I experienced it as sadness. How did you take this? I don't know how much of this you watched. I didn't watch it for the show. And by the way, there was even one guy who said the thin blue line, like these guys were holding up signs as the thin blue line as they were beating cops.
Yeah.
And he was like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah, and it wouldn't make sense to play the footage over the show, but the footage is absolutely
just screaming,
literally,
and,
yeah, because obviously, yeah, it's that kind of thing. But it's horrible, and that stuff is that's the worst. And then, like you're saying, the cops are bad, and then the politicians are who cares, in my opinion, because again, it seems fabricated to me, particularly both of them. Adam Schiff, you're right.
Yeah, he's like crying. Oh, this hurts me so much.
It's just hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And he's getting out ahead of it. He could be accused of the exact same thing in 2016, 2017. Obviously, Adam Kinzinger sounds like he's doing it entirely for political reasons. He's posturing. He started crying too. I didn't even play that clip. We did in the headlines.
Yeah.
I just don't like this stuff. But isn't this mass gaslighting, man? Isn't this mass gaslighting? Here's the thing. Yes, January 6th, what happened on it was unacceptable and extreme.
Yeah.
100%. On the other side of the table, if they were trying to overthrow the government, shouldn't they have brought guns? And if Trump was trying to get them to overthrow the government, why did he tell them to be peaceful? How do I get past those two things?
Well, he says different things.
If we use the word coup or insurrection, or junta, things that could apply to tanks rolling up, junta, thank you, to tanks rolling up onto Capitol Hill, where the military descends to try to overthrow this stuff. That's the level that applies. I get it. Semantics can be tricky sometimes, and sometimes a word seems like it might make sense because it technically fits, but the moral tone is completely off. Junta, insurrection, those things seem completely off. This is an angry mob, and this kind of behavior is politically unacceptable. But I'm not going to call this an insurrection. It's crazy. That's gaslighting. They're lying to us. They're propagandizing us. That's simply what it is. Where am I going wrong here, Jamarl?
You asking me? Well, look, I don't necessarily think you need to bring guns to it. And like I said, I think I've made it.
Wait, wouldn't you? What would you? Okay,
no,
don't you need some weapons? If you're trying to overthrow a country, the most powerful country on the face of the earth.
Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
Like I said, I've made the point before that the people who are going there in and of itself is not overthrow.
Okay, but then
like
what
for
was
example, like if those guys, let's say they got what they want. Let's say they did exactly what they wanted. They were able to knock down the Capitol. They were able to grab Mike Pence. Let's say they were able to hang Mike Pence. Does America stop? Well, of course not.
If they wanted to hang Mike Pence, or they wanted to, let's say, kill Mike Pence, which again,
hang
horrible.
Would do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they have brought guns? Wouldn't they have brought like weaponry with which to have? Like, here's the thing. This does not seem at all premeditated. So you can say that a crowd.
What doesn't seem premeditated?
This,
you mean the people who bought the zip ties?
And here's the thing.
Or the people who bought the pipe bombs.
Okay, but are you saying the crowd there? That's the thing. Why did it happen hours into it? And why was there no? Why were there again? Why did the pipe bombs not get used? You say that stuff as if that's relevant.
What do you
why
mean?
were the? Because
Shane.
Here's the thing. If this were an actual insurrection that we were talking about, right, we would see weaponry being used.
Why do you think that?
Because that's what it takes.
You think that people would bring guns to the Capitol and start shooting politicians?
This feels like gaslighting. It's like, why would you think that if
well,
it's like accusing somebody of killing you without raising their fists or doing anything to hurt you. It's like, you tried to kill me, but it's like, okay.
But they were raising their fists. They were fighting cops.
Okay. And but in the metaphorical sense, extending it into it.
Well, let's be specific. Let's be specific. Like I said
that's not what it would take.
Well, let's be specific. I was very clear, at least from my perspective, that it's the totality of it. I don't believe for a moment that the people specifically there, now in their heads, they might have thought, we're going to stop the vote. Because that's what was taking place. It was this transfer of power, et cetera, and they were there for the idea of that.
Is that an insurrection? Is that an insurrection?
I think the totality of it is.
But what does that mean? What is the totality of it?
I've been very specific about it.
Wait, you said the totality, and then you're saying specific. Which is it? Is it the totality, or is it a specific fact?
What are you talking about?
You said you just jumped between two different extremes.
I didn't jump between two different things. You're looking for things to try to attack as opposed to listening to what I'm saying.
I'm trying to look for evidence, and it feels like it feels like this is how gaslighting would work.
You're looking for anything to go after. I've been very specific. It's the totality of it that's the problem. It's Donald Trump in addition to the crowd. It's all of it. It's not the one specific thing. Do I think that the crowd was going to overthrow America? No. Do I think Donald Trump tried to? Yes. 1,000% yes. And I will tell you that every
let's
day.
Get into that for a second. Okay, let's get into that for a then. Or we could, we got to guess.
It's up to you. But we've had this conversation 1,000 times.
I know, but this commission's going on right now, so we're going to be having it.
And personally, I think the totality of it. What was Donald Trump's intention? Do you think Donald Trump's intention was to stay in power, yay or nay?
I think Donald Trump...
What do you think his intention was?
I think his intention was bestial. I think he was responding emotionally.
Bestial.
Yes, to a feeling of betrayal by his vice president and out of desperation at losing the presidency. But he didn't know what to do.
I'm going by what he said. I'm going by what he said.
He was clearly
do you think he was trying to get Pence to overthrow the election?
Did he order violent overthrow?
Do you think he was trying to get Pence? Answer my question. Do you think he was trying to get Pence to overthrow the election? Yes or no?
Jamarl, we can just talk over each other, but that doesn't make for good radio.
Because you're not going to answer my question.
Because you're not going to answer mine.
I answered everything you've asked.
No, you haven't, dude.
What are you talking about? I've answered everything that you've ever asked about this stuff, and I've been straightforward and honest with you.
Into another question.
I think that the entirety of this was a putsch attempt.
Okay.
I think Donald Trump was trying to overthrow the election.
I get it.
I think he was trying to use the crowd to assist in that. I think he was trying to get Pence to overthrow it. I think he was trying to get the various members in the various states to overdo it. I think all of that was a putsch attempt.
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
Why would he have used the word peaceful? Why would he have said to peacefully march on Congress if he wanted them to violently overthrow?
How long was Trump's speech?
You didn't answer the question.
Wait. First, how long was Trump's speech?
No, dude, you just pivoted to another question.
Well, because you're
like asking, I just said you did.
Okay. Why would he use the term peaceful? Donald Trump lies 1,000 times his breathing. And yes, he did use the term peaceful. Donald Trump also made the point that when somebody overthrows the election, then it doesn't matter anymore. Meaning that the rule set that people typically go by doesn't apply.
But then
he said that
why would he use
very
the word
specifically.
Peaceful? Well, you got to convince the audience and me. Why did he use the word peaceful?
Shane, people could say all sorts of things.
Okay, but if I'm going to...
So if he says, I want you to guys to march peaceful to the place, but keep in mind, the moment that it's no longer a fair election and they cheat, anything is fair game.
All right.
Why would he say that? Meaning you could say things. Obama used to give speeches all the time where he would say one thing and then say something else that countermands the last thing that he said, almost to create this kind of negative thing. You're acting as if just because somebody says something, especially somebody like Trump that lies flagrantly, that it is flat back true. And I'm saying that just because he said it doesn't mean it's true, especially if there's a 30-minute or 40-minute speech and you're taking one word of it.
Okay, but because that's the crucial word. If he's telling them to march, if he's telling them to march in Congress, and while he tells them that, he says to do so peacefully, and they have been peaceful up to that point, and he doesn't say anything to try to get them to become violent.
I just told you what he said.
What did he say? No, you didn't. You didn't give any specific.
The moment that you tell somebody, in fact, we should just play his speech. We should just play a speech.
We could. That'd be a long,
marching on the Capitol.
A long clip. But
because if you remember, that was the thing that they started shutting down. Because the question is, why doesn't the President of the United States, that has a philosophical responsibility to protect the Capitol, not protect the Capitol? He's sitting there as he watches people raid the Capitol. And as they call him, try to get him to call them off, he doesn't do it.
100%.
So you need to explain to me.
Which is why I'm saying it's bestial.
You need to explain to me why
and I've criticized him for that before, too.
Shane, I'm making the point that you need to explain to me why the President of the United States doesn't call off his mob, even when they are calling him and say, President, call off your mob, call off your mob. And he wouldn't do it. Does the President of the United States see the people banging on the windows and knocking the windows and fighting cops? Yes. Does he call them off? No. No, he doesn't. That's what I mean. That's what you people need to explain when they're seeing the president saying, well, he said this one word peaceful in an entire 30-minute speech. Yeah, but part of that speech was, hey, man, the moment that they steal it from you, the old rules doesn't apply. Or Trump feeling great about the people hitting the Capitol and people are calling him McCarthy, screaming at him, dude, call off your mob, call off your mob. Well, hey, McCarthy, maybe they care about it more than you do. It's that stuff. It's not the one word. It's not the one word. But we can disagree on it. I think all of it in its entirety was a putsch attempt. No, I don't think the people who were marching, whatever was in their heads, was ever going to knock over the Capitol. Do I think Trump had the potential? Yes. Yes. 1,000% yes. I think he had the potential. I think people are looking at this stuff with this kind of, oh, it was comical because it was in the open.
Jamarl, potential is not action.
Potential is not action.
If he
took the action.
Really, what actions did he take? Again, that is negative action. Not calling them off, which I think is stupid and bestial. I would say again, it's emotional. Not calling them off. That is not an action. That's a negative action.
I don't know what that means.
He's not actually doing something there. Not calling them off is not doing something. It's an absence of doing something, which is my point. So if you're going to say that he urged them into doing it, with what words? I need to hear the proof. If you're going to say he wanted them to do it,
I told you the words.
What words?
I mean, you gave me one word peaceful.
Yes,
you said one word peaceful out of an entire speech.
You haven't given any.
What are you talking about? Now, you can disagree with it. You can disagree with it.
Let's get specific here. What you're saying is that because when Trump says this election was overthrown, therefore the rules are different. That's the same damn thing the Democrats have been saying for years. That's effectively what the Democrats have been doing for years.
Do you agree with what the Democrats were doing for years?
Of course not.
Do you think that they were trying to deny the fact that Trump won the election?
And Trump did the same damn thing. But when you're going to say that the base, was the cat hat
I have no idea
march in early 2017? I can't say the actual name.
Why not?
The feline hat. Feline hat march, the women's march of early 2017, was that an insurrection even though the numbers were far higher? Of course not.
If they
not just
the Capitol,
just because there wasn't violence.
Did they ransack the Capitol?
I get it, but the mass scale of the thing, and then following that
up. Did they ransack the Capitol?
Of course
That's what we're talking about.
Of course not. But this line of protest that you can say continued into BLM, which got more riotous and accelerated throughout the presidency.
We should go to Mark Frost.
We could.
Because at this point, we're talking about BLM protests. When we're at January 6th Commission,
you went on a spiel
we were having a fight about Trump and everything else, and I had every fight about it with you, and now we're talking about Black Lives Matter.
I had to fight to get words in. Okay, dude, I get it, but you took us like almost 10 minutes over. I had to fight to get words in, and it felt one-sided. It did. I did. And then you did the thing I just said that you were going to be doing, which is...
Spend 5 minutes to make your point.
No, I would prefer to go to Mark Frost, too, because we have plenty of time. Or we can talk to Mark about it, although he's probably pretty exasperated and a little bit concerned hearing how we're doing right now. So
I mean, my point of view on this is very clear. I mean, you can disagree with it, but I haven't deviated or shifted, and I've answered everything that you've ever asked about it straightforwardly.
Multiple times that when I asked you, you didn't answer.
Shane, I answered every... Go back and look at this video. I answered everything that you asked.
I can. Literally right after... Whatever. It's just operation at this point. Let's go into Mark Frost. We're going into our break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back with economist and friend of the show, Mark Frost. Be back in a minute.
Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. And we've got a list to get through here. We're joined by Mark Frost, friend of the show, entrepreneur, economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, a capitalist, a Schumpeterian, and a recovering libertarian. Mark, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. That was fun, by the way.
What?
I got through writing you like a few days ago saying the beauty of you guys is you never yell at each other.
No, we don't yell. I mean, we definitely go back at each other, but yelling, we try not to. No, I think because at a certain point, it's kind of like when you're arguing with your wife. I always tell my wife that there's a line that you don't want to break past. Like we had a friend of the family that got into a fight, and we were there, and she, like, the wife spit on the guy, and we was like, whoa, and it's like you can't come back from that. Like it's at a certain point, it's like you want to keep things within a certain boundaries where you don't have to kind of bring back the boundaries. But no, argue, yes. Definitely.
As you can hear, and I can confirm, you did send that text, and that's why you heard me going out. I was like, I don't want Mark to feel like he has to be the mediator here. But we got enough stuff to talk about. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good, but I do want to say it's like Dr. John Gottman, who runs the Love Lab and has spent 30 years evaluating relationships. Conflict is healthy as long as you don't let it turn into contempt.
Yes.
No, not contempt. And, like honest conflict. You don't want it to be nonsense stuff.
That is. You got to work through that stuff. And that's why you got to keep the communication going. But let's get into it. Because I said I had a list, and I want to be clear here. You sent me a thing a couple of days ago, late last week, in fact, where you gave me 7 different topics or 7 different sort of facts, sets of events that we've been talking about for years. And specifically, you brought up a couple of years ago. Now, I'm going to start going down this list. And there may be some things we agree about, some things that we disagree about, but I just thought this was interesting, and it's kind of relevant today. First broad category of things. I'm not going to literally go down all 7 items. First broad category has to do with inflation, modern monetary theory, the effects of this stuff. Where you said, basically, MMT, modern monetary theory, is inherently inflationary. With metaphysical certainty, I think is the phrase that you used. That's how inflationary it is. And it seems like we have been broadly following MMT policies, at least in the loosening of the purse strings. And sure enough, we see inflation. That does seem like a metaphysical certainty, or at least you're correct in this sense. But Jamarl.
But Mark, don't you think this is kind of cheap? I mean, these guys have been dropping money for decades, trillions and trillions of dollars for decades. I mean, you're talking about Bill Clinton, you're talking about going into Obama, who basically instilled Bush's tax cuts into law. You're talking about Donald Trump, who gave trillions of dollars to basically people who didn't need it. And now you get to a situation where a president comes in and is like, okay, we're going to give X amount to the public, or we're going to increase taxes on this particular class of people, or we're going to give X amount of trillions back for the healthcare or whatever else. And then all of a sudden, there's a screams about inflation. Is it true that a lot of this inflation is coming from the breaking of, let's say, the changing of things based on COVID, meaning the supply chains breaking down in the various countries? I mean, there's an article that just came out that was talking about how the supply chains breaking down was directly related or directly causing inflation, especially in foreign countries or some of the other countries that have a harder time dealing with it. Now, what say you? Is it really MMT policies that we've been putting forth that has been, beneficial to the public and everything else is increasing it? Or is it on some level related to COVID, the breaking of supply chains and this kind of reorganization of things due to COVID?
Yes, it's very different what we've done, because this is the first time, other than World War II, that we've used monetary policy to buy things other than treasury bonds. So monetary policy has always been, or at least since 1953 with the Treasury Fed Accord, has always been separate from fiscal policy. If the government wants to spend more than it takes in revenue, it has to issue treasury bonds. We did not do this beginning with the Trump administration, and it was continued by the Biden administration with respect to what they have urged the Fed to do and what Jerome Powell has actually done. So the Fed actually directly bought stuff, which was very different. It also happened back to a much smaller extent, and it was a relatively tiny amount of money. But when you increase the money supply by 30% in a short amount of time, you will, with metaphysical certainty, inflation. Because long-term inflation, structural inflation, is, by definition, a monetary phenomena. If you double the stock of money today, everything tomorrow is going to be twice as expensive.
But I think the crucial point is, and maybe there's just a factual thing here. Why are we only seeing it now? Because Jamarl's saying it does seem kind of convenient. We've just gone through this major crisis. Sure, we've spent money, but we've been spending money for a long time. Most notably, we're still going through this pandemic thing. And, he has a point there. Is it just that objectively more money has been spent during this period, Mark?
You aren't only seeing it now. This started almost as soon as the Fed started turning on the spigot. The difference was the shutdowns also constrained demand in a lot of different areas and that sort of a thing. And there's always a lag between the time that you turn a knob and the time that the intended and unintended consequences happen.
When did the Feds turn on the spigot, Mark?
Sorry, what?
When did the Feds turn on the spigot? What was the date? I need to nail it down.
Look, sure. Roughly at about March of 2020.
Well, wait a minute. But they were dropping money prior to that. If you're thinking of, especially after the collapse or the crisis.
Oh, you are absolutely wrong on that. Dropping money, if you want to talk normal Fed operations, quantitative easing, fine. Quantitative easing is by definition inflationary. There's no doubt about that. But it's controlled inflation because they're doing the quantitative easing that they have decided is the appropriate amount of inflation.
2 to 3%, something like that, right?
2 to 3%. So what happened with the pandemic is everything changed. People, in my view, overreacted from a financial and physical perspective, and they printed a ton of money, and they didn't just give it to the banks. They flooded the economy with it. There was direct loans to businesses by the Fed, unprecedented. You have to go back to the bailout of AIG by the Treasury, but at least they printed the bonds to do it, and the Fed bought the bonds. So there was a giant difference with respect to MMT on this. Now, there are advantages of MMT. There are people I know, friends of mine, that are avid advocates of this, and to be fair, they would argue, well, all we did is more of what we were already doing. That's wrong, but it's also not completely wrong. One thing that we know with just truth, it would be like in the news business, if you want to have a radio show, you have to broadcast over the airwaves, right? Well, if you increase the money supply more than GDP grows, you're going to have inflation. If you massively increase the money supply and start buying stuff with it directly by 30%, you're going to have much more severe.
Right there.
This is
okay.
And
so
this
that's
is
the distinction.
This is a horribly dumb metaphor, maybe, but I think it gets the idea across in an extremely simple form, which is okay. MMT says this is how things work. This is already how the government spends money.
Yes.
Fundamentally, the public has a misunderstanding about the creation of money, and MMT kind of corrects that.
Yes.
And describes the current status quo. Now, if I said eating is normal, the way I currently eat is normal. I eat kind of crappily. I eat fast food. I eat some good stuff, some bad stuff, whatever. That's normal. And then I use that to justify eating as much as I want to. I will gain weight. And in the same way, again, it's a dumb metaphor. If I use MMT to justify spending as much as I want to, just because spending a certain amount of money, just because printing and spending a certain amount of money at a steady level to sustain the country is a normal thing, that doesn't mean that you can use the idea of spending or the idea of eating to justify doing that much more. You'll get obese or you'll get serious inflation. Is that broadly right, Mark?
I don't like the analogy because eating is still eating. The difference between MMT and regular traditional Federal Reserve monetary policy is that MMT advocates direct purchases by the Fed for the welfare of society. So if people are hungry, the Fed prints money and feeds them. If people need low-income housing, the Fed prints money and buys low-income housing. The point that they want to make is there's nothing sacred about U.S. Treasury bonds. The Fed could just as easily drop money from helicopters or pay people to dig a hole and then pay other people to fill it back up.
Well, it depends. I mean, it does depend. I mean, like somebody from MMT, look, I've always made the argument that I think it goes too far.
Argument.
Well, I've always made the argument that it goes too far, meaning from the standpoint of MMT, but they're not entirely wrong in the sense of saying that the government can buy whatever it wants, providing that the real resources exist. I think that's the difference in the conversation that we're having here. They would argue, for example, it's not just dropping money out of the helicopters to dig a hole or fill a hole. It's dropping money out of the helicopters to do things that are beneficial to the society in something that they don't have. So, yes, you're absolutely right that if you drop money out of helicopters and say everybody can go to school, then immediately if you have a huge number of people going to school and you don't have enough books, textbooks, desks, buildings, institutions, et cetera, then yeah, you're going to get inflation for those things because the real resources don't necessarily exist. I think their argument would be an issue of real resources. Do they exist or not? If they don't exist, you're going to get inflation. Am I wrong? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong on that.
Yes, you're wrong to the extent that inflation is very simple to understand. If you print more money than you have goods and services being created.
Mark, that's what I said.
But that is what he said. Yeah, I heard that too.
That's literally what I said.
Basically, if the goods and services are there, if they're being created by government spending, then you won't get inflation.
Right, because they're there.
You're printing money to sort of match the creation of these new available goods and services. Is that?
Well, then I missed your point. So let's just use a scenario. GDP increases by 5%. Well, ideally, the money supply should increase by 5% if you want to have zero inflation. That's just a mathematical fact. MMT is very different than quantitative easing. Now, I'm actually a critic of the Fed. If I was king, I would revise our monetary system because I've always said, for 20 years, I've said, if the American public truly understood our monetary system, we would have a different monetary system.
Mark, it sounds like you're saying two different things.
Certain. One thing is for certain. Everywhere, MMT-type monetary policies have been implemented, where the central bank has been given a blank check to improve the welfare of society. You've found high inflation and, in extreme cases, hyperinflation.
And well, the sad thing here is you can think of it almost like this. If you're spending on welfare programs to improve the quality of life for people who don't have enough money, okay, put that in one column. But then if those programs don't work very well and it ends up being net inflationary, where you're having to pay for them, but you're not getting the goods and services out of them. So you have an oversupply of money, if that makes sense. You're paying more than they're worth, which is inflationary. Who does that inflation affect? Inflation is effectively regressive. If I have to pay a certain amount of money just to stay alive and the cost of those goods keeps going up, well, I have to pay that as a poor person or as a rich person or whatever. That cost is going to keep going across the board. And poor people clearly would have less to spend. Therefore, more of their money is going to be devoted to buying the increasingly valuable, costly, whatever way you want to look at it, the increasingly costly things you need like rent and food and such. Isn't that effectively a way of looking at this, Mark, that if your social programs don't work, if you spend too much on them, and they're not as efficient as you think they will be, then you get net inflation that ends up being a regressive tax on the lower population. Am I wrong or right there?
Giving people money in and of itself, more specifically, giving people printed money is not productive. It might benefit some people because obviously whoever gets it benefits. But on net, the unintended consequences become more expensive than the benefit that was achieved. We see that everywhere we look.
Well, but what if the idea is, what if you can get them out of a downward spiral? What if somebody is stuck in a mode where they only make so much money, they're working at a job that's factually, objectively not all that productive? Like flipping burgers at a McDonald's, you're making X many dollars an hour, not that many. You could be producing a lot more if you were able to get yourself into a position of having better skills, et cetera. And theoretically, having more money in the moment might help with that. Does that argument sway you, Mark?
Except that's not what economists mean by productivity. So when I was flipping burgers, my marginal productivity may not have been very high, but there's a lot of people that flip burgers. So in aggregate, the productivity of burger flipping is exceptionally high. And when you have monetary policy paying people's salaries. That is a recipe. Here's the bottom line of it.
Well, Mark, real quick. So there are a few things. We're talking about MMT versus Fed policy as if MMT is something very specific. We're talking about MMT as kind of a thought process. Let's be very clear about that. And that thought process includes a lot more than just Fed policy dropping money out of helicopters. I don't think anybody from MMT would say they want the Fed to drop money out of helicopters. What I would say, what they would probably want is for the Fed or for the government to start prioritizing things that are beneficial to the public and to the community. Meaning, if people need health care, pay for health care. It's not the job of the federal government per se. You could say yes, it's the job of an economist to figure out how many people is okay to die or to drop dead versus taking care of a virus. You could say that. You can make those arguments. But that's not the job of government to do that. The job of government on some level is to deal with the issues of society, whatever that is. And whatever the government needs to expand in order to accommodate that, that's what it needs to do. Now, you could say that that's wrong. You can take issues with the size of government, all that stuff. But let's just be clear that the government's job in this is our society has certain things that we need to deal with and to moderate in order to have a society. And that's what we're going to do and take care of. If that's healthcare, if that's ensuring that people can get a decent job, et cetera, or a decent wage, then that's what it does. I mean, I'm not sure the conflict here in regards to this kind of conversation. MMT is just the mode of thought in regards to doing that.
Because we're talking about monetary policy, and the government's job with respect to monetary policy is to maintain the value of money.
Yes.
And I would argue that since its inception, the Fed has failed miserably.
Well, in one sense of monetary policy, meaning the government's job goes beyond monetary policy. I guess that's my issue with this conversation. For example, for COVID.
Very simply, for your listeners, MMT can be very simply defined. It's the democratization of monetary policy. That's what it is.
Wait, what does that mean, though?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Because I would rather have somebody from MMT define it.
It's not like MMT means that suddenly we all get to vote in direct democratic form on what our government decides to do. Right. So what do you mean by that?
I'm sorry, I was talking over you or you were talking over me, one of the two.
Yeah, what do you mean by democratization of monetary policy?
I mean when the values and the desires of the body politic bleed into monetary policy. The entire purpose of a central bank, or that is an independent central bank, is independence. It divorces them from the whims and desires of the public.
Well, maybe it shouldn't be divorced from the whims and desires of the public.
Please let me finish.
I'm sorry.
People are hungry, and the government decides that it needs to feed them, or it wants to feed them, that it wants to help alleviate hunger, let's say, then the government needs to use fiscal policy to do that. That value needs to be paid for with real resources, and therefore taxes should be increased to be able to pay for that. When you start taking away the independence of the central bank, everywhere that has been tried, from Nazi Germany to Zimbabwe to dozens of other cases, it has been a disaster. And I worry about the future as monetary policy becomes increasingly democratized, because I just got through crunching some numbers. In the last 18 months, if you make $20,000 a year, your disposable income, what you actually have in purchasing power, has dropped by 30%. If you make $30,000 a year, it's dropped by about 20%. If you look at what we've spent on stimulus and COVID-19 abatement and that type of thing, in terms of helping people, what we've spent on the working poor is very, very small. That troubles me. And the inflation tax is exceptionally cruel because most people aren't really aware that they're even being taxed by it.
Yeah.
All they do is scratch their head each paycheck and go, wow, what's happening?
Well, but this is also kind of what I was saying earlier, too. It's regressive inherently, right? Inflation, when you get too much inflation, it acts as a regressive tax, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then you have to consider payroll taxes. You know, a lot of the working poor don't pay federal income taxes, but they get taxed to death by...
just automatically getting taken out. Mark, we're out of time. But I hear you. And combining a couple of these things, you can see despair, people not knowing where the hell their money is going and having no real sense of it. And all the while not actually being helped, despite, weathering the crisis. Mark, Thank you for talking with us. Mark Frost, great guest. We've got to go to our hour break. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and our last 2 hours this morning. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You know, sometimes having these conversations are aggravating because they can go askew, and oftentimes I think you may not disagree in the way that you think you're disagreeing. So Mark, right there in that conversation, is making a distinction between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And it would be one, let's say, policy by the Fed versus policy by government in order to pay for itself. So Joe Biden says, I'm going to spend a bunch of money for the infrastructure. Great. And then they say, okay, we're going to figure out how to pay for it later. Wait a minute. What do you mean you're going to figure out how to pay for it later? Oh, well, right, because we're bipartisan and we can't make an agreement on what we're going to pay for. Okay, so what are you going to do? We're just going to, what, just spend it again? You're just going to rate, like, meaning Mark is making the point that it's one thing for you to pass policy and raise taxes to pay for it. It's another thing to just say, we're going to have the Fed to do it, and we're just going to put it on the company, the countries.
It's kind of like, you can, there's fiscal policy, then there's monetary policy. And I might be wrong here, but it sounds like
he's making a distinction,
yeah, he's making the distinction. It sounds like they were separate for a long time. Government clearly supposed to respond in terms of its fiscal policy to what the citizen, population needs, what the country needs, that whole thing. And then monetary policy, early 20th century, we passed that off to the Fed. That became the Fed's duty effectively. And they weren't supposed to respond. They were supposed to be this independent party that didn't do whatever the democracy wanted them to do. And what he's saying is MMT is the Fed doing more of what democracy wants them to do. Fiscal policy and monetary policy on the same track. And I think he, just based on, this gets a little bit inside baseball or something like that, but based on Schumpeter, he's such a big fan of Schumpeter, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, the big book by Joseph Schumpeter. He's talked about it before on air, in fact, Mark, that you might remember this. Schumpeter describes capitalism sort of going socialistic, where the population influences the
so many resources,
economic
and so much,
policy making. They want more, and so they make it socialistic, and that's capitalism. That's the inevitable conclusion of capitalism, according to Schumpeter. According to Mark,
maybe I got that. I mean, I took that as different. I took Mark as saying that capitalism supplies so much for people's needs that they get to the point where it doesn't, meaning it kills itself. That's the way I take it, where it goes so far, people are so, flush with the things that they have and need and everything else that it just becomes something where it can't keep going. But we have to have him explain it. He probably can give a far better, more, professorial explanation of Schumpeter on this stuff. But no, I think he's making a distinction between those things. And I don't think he would have an issue if it's like, all right, pay for it. Whatever you're going to do, pay for it. I don't think he would have that issue. I think his issue is the lazy politics of, okay, we're not going to do the hard work of paying for this particular social program, so instead we're just going to put it on the country's dime. So now we're 20 trillion in debt, 30 trillion in debt, 50 trillion in debt. Like, the numbers get ridiculous and goofy at a certain point because the people and the politician don't want to take the hard work of just paying for it. Paying for it. Like, do your job. I get that it's difficult, but if you need to raise taxes, raise taxes. And they don't want to do that. That's, oh, we don't like doing that. Even when it's something that the American public is on board for to the tune of like 70%. Let's go into the headlines. But good conversation with Mark. I always enjoy those conversations. Mark is getting back to his libertarian roots. He's looking more. Because our producer was like, that guy's not a libertarian.
That guy's not a libertarian.
What about now?
He's a lefty. No.
Yeah, what about now? Yeah. All right, let's go to the headlines. In the news, about 108,775 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 406 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 63,248 cases per day, an increase of 145% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 57% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 34,603,433 human beings across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 600 11,128 very specific, unfortunate men, women, and children across the United States. The CDC has released mass guidance recommending that both the unvaccinated and the vaccinated, for the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. We have a clip for this. We have actually Jen Psaki responding, basically being pushed on this notion of mass guidance. Like, hey, this feels like a whiplash. Let's hear the clip of Psaki.
Today, they're changing their guidance. They're changing their advice to the American public, their public health advice, based on evolving data and an evolving historic guidance. That virus. That's exactly what they should be doing.
Is your message to Americans who are feeling whiplash right now? Why should they trust the same group of health officials who just 2 months ago told them they don't have to wear a mask anymore inside?
Because our goal is to save their lives. And our responsibility and the responsibility of public health officials is to continue to provide updated guidance.
And just so we're clear, I want to play the CDC guidance by Rochelle Walensky also. This is the CDC director. I'll give a moment to pull the clip up. Look, I don't have an issue with what Psaki said. I think the issue here is that it's not that the guidance has changed more than anything else or that the science has changed. The science is what the science is. Excellent. Let's play from Rochelle Walensky first before we go into Psaki's comment.
In areas with substantial and high transmission, CDC recommends fully vaccinated people wear masks in public indoor settings to help prevent the spread of the Delta variant and protect others. This includes schools. CDC recommends that everyone in K-12 schools wear a mask indoors, including teachers, staff, students, and visitors, regardless of vaccination status. Children should return to full-time in-person learning in the fall with proper prevention strategies in place.
Yeah, this is where it gets complicated, and maybe we should come back to it. Look, Psaki's comment, I don't have an issue with Psaki's comment. It's not that the science per se has changed. What's changed is they only got 49% of people being vaccinated. And when they're looking at the polling and the research, only 5% of people are saying that being able to go into public has changed their point of view. So if you remember, Shane, when Biden initially came out and says, hey, if you're unvaccinated, you can go out into public. You don't have to put on a mask and everything else. It's like, well, how would they know who's vaccinated, who's not? That didn't really matter. What cared, or what they thought was, by allowing people to just enjoy their lives again, that will be enough in and of itself incentive for them to do it. Well, what they found was the Kaiser report was like 5%. That only moved 5% of people saying, being able to do that is enough for me to do it. Doesn't do it. I mean, you got like huge numbers of saying, yeah, I'm not going to do it. That's not enough for me to do it. And by the way, how do you know who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated when they're deciding to go into a building and saying, hey, I am just merging in with the people who are vaccinated? You have no way to know. I mean, meaning it didn't give them the bang for the buck that they thought they were going to get out of it. And so now all of a sudden, we need people to wear masks again. We can't protect against the variant, so we need people who are even vaccinated to wear masks when they're in these type of settings, et cetera, et cetera. That is not something they wanted to do. That's not something they wanted to do. We can go back to it, but I think this is a big deal that she's having to engage that. Yesterday, the House Select Committee on January 6th riot conducted its first meeting. Some of the key takeaways include tearful testimony from the police, promise coming from the Republican members saying, quote, every minute, unquote, of Trump's actions on January 6th will be investigated. And we have the Kinzinger clip. Let's go to that one first.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee. Thank you to our witnesses. I never expected a day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. I think it's important to tell you right now, though, you guys may individually feel a little broken. You guys all talk about the effects you have to deal with, and you talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. Democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days, how we take accountability for that.
All right, yeah, Adam Schiff. I have so many issues with that. It's no, like, astonishingly so. But we can come back to it. I think we have one clip from Kissinger.
No, that was Kissinger.
Oh, that was Kissinger. Okay. Let's go to the Adam Schiff clip then. Schiff is saying something similar.
I'd like to think, as Amanda Gorman so eloquently said, that we're not broken, we're just unfinished. Because if we're no longer committed to a peaceful transfer of power after our elections, if our side doesn't win, then God help us. If we deem elections illegitimate merely because they didn't go our way, rather than trying to do better the next time, then God help us. And if we're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors, if they're born in another country or they don't look like us, then God help us. But I have faith because of folks like you. And Adam, I didn't expect this would be quite so emotional either, but it must be an Adam thing today. But I'm so grateful to all of you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Now I see. That's what he meant. Adam Kissinger and Adam Schiff, both breaking down and crying to get across the theatrics of this commission. It's weird to me listening to this. The reality of it is probably right? Like if you're one of the cops who were there, or if you're like me, and you're like, wow, there was a raid on the Capitol, and then you see this other kind of weird, I don't know, we can talk about it after the fact. It's just very strange.
Interesting thing about Adam Schiff.
Yeah.
Did you know that his wife's name is Eve?
Really?
Which is either slightly cute or kind of narcissistic, actually. That's true.
It's like Loki finding Loki, to fall in love with. Adam finding Eve to fall in love with. That's funny. Let's keep going. The Oakland City Council voted Monday to open a co-governed homeless encampment to provide shelter for 40 people in West Oakland. Residents will have a say over food runs, water access, social programs, and more. This will become the second site in the city where residents have an opportunity to work with their care providers to better their living conditions. Good. Anthony Blinken in India said he was worried that Afghanistan would become a pariah state under the Taliban. Macron said that France owes Polynesia a debt for over 200 nuclear tests conducted over the last 3 decades, with more than 1,000 people affected by the nuclear fallout. Simone Biles, who will not compete tomorrow's all-around competition, where she was expected to defend her gold from 2016. This comes after she withdrew in the middle of the team competition yesterday, leaving the Americans in second as the Russian athletes took gold. Biles has stated that she needed to focus on her mental health, and pressure of being, quote, the world's best, unquote, is extremely heavy. You're not the world's best if you can't defend your gold. This is a flat fact. It has nothing to do with mental health. Your mental health can be what it is, but to be the world's best, you have to be able to defend it. Kate Ledecky won the gold medal in the 1,500-meter freestyle, rebounding from her 5th place finish in the 200 freestyle. U.S. men's basketball team also bounced back from their loss to France by destroying Iran by 54 points, led by Damian Lillard's 21 points. So far, the medal leaders in order are the United States, China, Japan, Russia athletes, and Australia. However, Japan has the most gold with 12, followed by China with 11, and the United States with 10. Activision Blizzard employees will be staging a walkout at the company for their attempts to combat the lawsuit against them in California. The company's lawyers blame bureaucrats that are driving businesses out of the state by going after them in court like they are to Activision. Regarding the hostile work environment and sexual misconduct accusations, the claims represent a, quote, distorted and untrue picture of our company, unquote. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those are your headlines. All right, so let's get into a few of these conversations. One question real quick. If you and I are in an argument and I say I am doing everything that is provocative and I am saying things that are clearly aggressive, despite the fact that I am saying that I'm being peaceful. Let's say I am in your face. Let's say I am clearly issuing threats. Let's say the logic of what I am saying clearly has a connotation of violence, meaning the expectation of it. And yet I am saying things like, I just wanted to be peaceful. Clearly, you will feel threat. Clearly, there would be a larger context to what I am saying, meaning you can get across things outside of just the specific words that you're saying. And I think you would agree with that. I think if you tell 30 million people that the election was stolen, that you know what those people are going to feel and what those people are going to think. I mean, for example, when I say that the investigation for the commission should take place beyond just, the basics of what happened, beyond just the congressmen and everything else, I think you should also go into the FBI and the police force. I want to know, meaning a well-rounded context of what happened that day, including the president. And for me, I think it's a reason that many of these other political leaders in both parties have been very dicey about using this notion of you've been cheated. Because the expectation is the public is going to do exactly what the public did. They're going to be annoyed. They're going to be very angry. They're going to feel like something that was a constitutional responsibility has been withdrawn from them, meaning the anger and everything else is seeded into the process, at least from my perspective of this stuff. Look, I don't know. I mean, going through Trump's speech and picking out one detail after the next, as opposed to the context of the speech, yes, it can be done. Yes, Democrats did it on January 6th, where they were lavish on, he said these words. And it's like, yeah, dude, it's not the specific individual words, but I feel you guys using the individual words to make the point. I don't know, man. I was greatly bothered by January 6th. I'm still bothered by January 6th. And I think I am more bothered on some weird way that this commission, A, is not going to get off the ground, that the select committee is probably going to be very specific, meaning they're looking for very specific things in very specific ways, and they'll use whatever they can use in order to make those specific things. And even under the best of scenarios, even if they did do a legitimate commission, I know that part of the politics of it is to make the other side look bad. I don't know. It's disappointing. I'll put it that way.
I'm down to argue about this one more, except that we have a guest on the line.
Oh yeah, we have a guest on the line.
At least booked.
And I wasn't saying it to argue. I guess I'm saying it's disappointing. That's all. It's just disappointing.
I don't know. I think this has been gotten entirely wrong. But we got to go into our break because we're going to be coming back talking with Teddy Fikre, Tedros Fikre. Normally, we talk about Ethiopia. This time we're talking about COVID. He writes about that stuff. Now, Teddy and we are kind of on opposite sides of this. We're going to be disagreeing. I'm sure we're going to be getting into a debate. Although, interestingly enough, probably not as fiery as the one that Jamarl and I got into. So we'll see what actually happens.
Strangely
enough.
Strangely.
We'll see what happens. But Teddy, should be a good conversation. By the way, after that, right now we are planning on taking calls. So at 8:30, we're planning on opening up the phone lines for a segment there. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We'll be right back with Tedros Fikre on the other side of the short break.
Fault lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking COVID facts with our next guest, Teddy Fikre. Tedros Fikre is the co-founder and former editor of GuillonJournal.com. Follow him on Twitter at Tedros Fikre and check out Guillon Journal. Now, earlier in the show, Jamarl and I got into an argument over January 6th. That kind of argument is actually fairly rare. In fact, Nancy Pelosi's been avoiding it completely. She's only been selecting Republicans for this committee who already hate Trump. She's trying to keep that debate off. And Republicans, meanwhile, they have their own
should
committee.
have the argument
They
that we
should
had.
have that argument that we had, but people aren't. The media isn't included, and that extends to other topics too. Of course, that extends to COVID. A lot of people aren't talking with people across on the other side of the line with COVID. So I got into a debate with somebody on Twitter the other day, late last week. Then they linked Teddy into it. Then he and I went back and forth. And to get deeper into it, to talk about this other stuff, and in the spirit of conversation, Teddy Freecray joining us now. How are you doing this morning, Teddy?
Good morning, Shane. How's everything going? Good morning, Jamal.
How's it going, man?
I'm doing well. Usually have me on for Ethiopia-related stuff, so kind of a different take coming on here to talk about COVID and the vaccine. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, heads up, we're planning on hitting this up with Teddy and then taking calls. And I believe we're going to be bringing Teddy into that too. So if you want to call and have a conversation about us, we're going to be getting into some controversial stuff. Let's do it. And no holds barred on any side. But we're all mature people, so let's get into it. Now, Teddy, the specific thing, I want to start us off. There were 3 different things I wanted to bring up, broadly speaking. But let's get to the one that we ended up talking about in that thread. There are all these, I'll set it up like this. All these different perspectives going on about the vaccines, the efficacy of the lockdowns, what the government's motivations are with doing this stuff. Jamarl and I have broadly been defensive of a lot of the things the government have done, while also being extremely critical of them for either suppressing voices on the opposite side, taking certain tacks, that kind of thing. I personally just think the way they've handled a lot of this, particularly suppressing dissenting opinions, is absolutely ridiculous, shameful, and frankly doesn't work, has been consistently a mistake. That's not how you handle debate. You handle debate by having it, not by suppressing it. With that said, Teddy, you've been writing about this for a while. We have different takes. Let's get into it. The thing that we got into on, I believe it was Friday, has to do with this article posted on The Lancet. Lancet is a medical journal, publishes things submitted by different people. Now, this was commentary submitted by 3 authors. And basically, and I see it, the way I see it, there is a misleading sentence in this article that I think is being spun. I think this being misread. I don't think they were careful in the way that they phrased it. Where basically it makes it sound like they're saying the vaccines are incredibly ineffective, that the vaccines are like, the Pfizer-BioNTech is like less than 1% effective, that kind of thing, extremely ineffective. I don't think that's actually what they're saying. It has to do with absolute risk versus relative risk and these 2 different ways of measuring things. But Teddy, I want to set this up. When you read this article, what did you see it saying and what did you write about it?
So, these things are kind of wonky, but they matter. Pfizer, for example, was fined in 2009, one of the largest fines in the history of corporations for engaging in medical fraud. And one of the things that they're very adept at doing is, for example, using relative risk reduction versus absolute risk reduction, right? The gold standard for measuring the efficacy of any vaccine or medication or any type of treatment is absolute risk reduction. Relative risk reduction is back in the day, they would say like 3 out of 4 doctors recommend this, or when they say like 95% effective. What that's doing is looking at the very small universe of people and whether or not it reduces the risk within that population.
Well, but it's whether or not they get sick, and this is where I think the argument goes wrong. Absolute risk reduction and relative risk reduction, you're absolutely right, are 2 different ways of measuring the efficacy of any intervention, whether it's a vaccine or medication or just treatment. You can something as simple as massage. If, is your back sore? Does this massage help? How many people, does this massage get rid of the back pain? And it's a ridiculous example. I can give a more realistic or familiar one. Say there's a 1% chance that you have a heart attack, that you're going to have a heart attack this year. Say that with metaphysical certainty. Your doctors told you whatever. You believe them. And then there's this medication that comes along that says it reduces the likelihood of having that heart attack by 90%. So most people, I think, read that and say, okay, it takes my 1% chance down to like 0.1%. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
Yeah.
I don't think most people, that's the relative risk reduction, basically. Relative to the sample of the population that actually gets this thing, how much does it reduce the risk?
Yeah.
Absolute risk reduction would say it makes you 0.9% less likely to have a heart attack. Not 90, because technically you only had a 1% chance in the first place. Right. So absolute risk reduction is taking, there's 2 different ways of measuring it. But for me, Teddy, relative risk reduction feels a lot more accurate. If I'm taking a medication, I already know that it's very unlikely that I'm going to have a heart attack. Yet I want to reduce that low chance even more, right?
Right, but it depends, right? It depends on whether or not you're in that at-risk category, right? So when the overall mortality rate of COVID-19, for example, is 0.66%, and the vast majority, if not the vast majority of people that contract COVID-19, like I did, end up recovering, then that doesn't apply to them, right?
But we know that it's extreme. I think a lot of people know you're very unlikely that you're going to die from it. It's like for the vast majority of the time the pandemic's been around, it's not like the government's saying there's a 90% chance you're going to, or there's a 10% chance or whatever, which would make, if people thought that, this would be a necessary corrective. But I don't think anybody really thinks that.
No, but that's the thing, though, right? But that's the misinformation that they're peddling. Because they make it seem like everyone is pretty much almost equally at risk, and that's not the case.
I don't think
that's not the argument at all. I mean, if you remember, much of the argument had to do with the elderly population being the one that was at most or most at risk. In fact, part of the problem of trying to get the younger people vaccinated was because it was hit that hard that it was the older population that was most likely to die from it. So the younger population thought, well, why do I need to get vaccinated? That was the thought behind it. I don't think that was the way they were pushing it out at all. I think the issue became, Teddy, that 611,000 people dropped dead. And from the standpoint of the U.S., that's more people that has died in all of our wars. And that took place over the course of 1 year. And the people who have gotten infected, there are a lot of them, 30 million people. You have a large number of those people who have symptoms that have gone for months after the fact. So it becomes, you have a highly transmissible virus. You have 600,000 people that have dropped dead. And then the public or the country at that point is, how do we reduce harm? That's where it comes in.
It goes back into, again, if the absolute risk reduction. If 99.44% of people survive COVID-19, and the vast majority of those people survive on their own, and in fact recover, then it goes back into absolute risk reduction. If it's one thing to say that these vaccines for the at-risk population are 95% effective, let's say. But when 99.44% of people are not dying from this COVID-19, then the absolute risk reduction absolutely matters.
Teddy, 600,000 people have dropped dead. Well, but 30 million people have been infected, and each one of those people that are getting infected has the potential to spread it to somebody else and create variants that are going to be either that much more transmissible, that much more deadly, or otherwise. I mean, I think you're undermining or ignoring the transmissibility aspect of this virus and the number of people it can affect going forward.
I'll put it like this. I got the vaccine without having any concern that I would die from getting COVID. I didn't even really think I'd get sick. I was a little bit concerned I might have lingering symptoms, but mostly it was like, I want to get this vaccine because I want to hang out with my older family members. I want to hang out with my aunt and my mom again, people who are older and some of whom have comorbidities. And therefore I'm like, I don't want to spread it to them. I don't know many. And if somebody had told me the Pfizer vaccine isn't 90% effective, it's 0.9% effective, or it's 1.8% effective, I would have been incredibly confused by what they were saying. It would have been more misleading to me than the fairly commonsensical thing, which is if you get this vaccine, it reduces your already very small chance that much further. Oh, and it reduces the rate of spread. It reduces, the potential of getting it all sick, all that stuff. In other words, this feels more misleading to me than the relative risk reduction. And I don't know that everybody reading your article got that, Betty.
So, if I could, for the record, by the way, I do not in any means undermine or diminish the horrors of this COVID-19. My mom passed away from COVID-19 on May 15th of 2020.
Oh, man, I'm sorry about that.
I'm not a COVID, thank you. I'm not a COVID denier. This is something that I still struggle with to this day, the fact that she's no longer with us. So I'm not on here to pretend like COVID-19 does not exist. What I'm on here to say is that when something, tragic happens to one person, that should not apply to the rest of society. I understand 600,000 Americans passing away is horrific, including my mom. But that doesn't mean that everyone that's not at risk from this virus should then automatically be injected with something that, by the way, is still experimental. It has not been fully approved by the FDA. It's still in phase 3 clinical trial. And this is stuff that they're not telling you. They're not telling us the overall risks of these vaccines.
But frankly, to your point, I don't think they know them. I just don't think that they think there are any. And it's not extremely new. I forget, we had a guest on the other day who said a good point, I think it was Ted Rall, who said a good point to make here would be, these vaccines have actually been around for a long time. mRNA has been around for decades. Now, my rebuttal of that, or my response, or whatever, my retort was, Okay, but this is the first time it's being used in a vaccine. So people's concerns are somewhat justified. But here's my response, Teddy. If people don't want the mRNA vaccines, there's the AstraZeneca shot, there's the J&J shot, and that's just for starters. There are more coming down the pipeline. Why shouldn't they just take those, which would be more proved?
How about if we don't want it, period? What if we don't want to do anything that's experimental? Don't we have free will as Americans? What happened to America?
But vaccines aren't experimental. That changed the point. Like the mRNA vaccine, okay, fair enough. But you have other vaccines that are just traditional vaccines.
And I hear you on that, Teddy, but like, I don't know, but there's a conversation about it. And the tendency is going to be, because it is a public health crisis that we're dealing with, and I know that you said, and we shouldn't dismiss the 610,000 deaths and growing right now. And I know that you didn't. But my point is, nobody technically, as far as I can tell, is being forced into doing it right now. And I don't think they should be personally at all. I'm worried about what would happen if we did that. But that's not what's happening. What's happening right now is conversation. And if I can convince you, I don't know if you're vaccinated or not, but if I can convince you to get vaccinated, I guess I would. I guess I'd try to. But, you're one person. It's not, I don't want to shame you. I want to have a conversation with you, because ultimately you as a person matters more to me than you as a vaccinated person, if that makes sense. As a statistic, as a number, I'd rather engage with you on that level.
I think I'm harsher on this.
Well, if you're saying that we're not being compelled, Joe Biden is set to announce that all federal workers have to be vaccinated, quote unquote, right? The military is about to go down that pipe in starting September 1st. Health care places are making them mandatory. So these things, this is like Germany, papers, please. What happened to free will, Constitution, and all that kind of stuff? As conservatives on one side who love freedom, and as liberals on the other side who don't like being told what to do. Why are we being told what to do?
Teddy, under normal circumstances, I would 1,000% agree with you. I don't like this notion of mandating vaccines. Now, the problem is that you have 49% of people who have gotten vaccinated. You have variants that seem to be basically spawning in an unvaccinated population to the majority, but in some cases, breakthroughs in people who are already vaccinated. Meaning, the fact that you weren't able to get the 70% and the fact that you weren't able to convince people to get vaccinated, basically due diligence, then you ended up with harsher measures because they're concerned that they can't get their hands around it. You basically have a situation now that because people just didn't get either the basic regular vaccines or either the experimental, whichever one you want to pick your flavor, that you have variants that they don't have control over, that they're concerned that are going to break through the vaccinations. And the only line of defense that they have at this point are vaccinations. And so they're in this kind of weird spot of, we need to get people vaccinated, period. How do we do it? We tried to get them and convince them. We couldn't convince them. Now we're stuck with heavier measures. It's that. It's that. It's not that I love the heavier measures. Shane, I would imagine Shane doesn't like the heavier measures. But from my standpoint, I understand it. And on some level, I think I might even agree with it.
Oh, and the UK, one of the most, in terms of percentage, the most quote unquote vaccinated country in the world. 62% of people that are dying from COVID-19 are vaccinated.
Well, that's because of the population. Look at who's vaccinated in the country. Again, this is actually one of the things I wanted to get into.
But you can sit up here and rationalize everything that you want.
That's not a rationalization.
That's not a rationalization.
I didn't even get into
Teddy,
it.
99%, give or take, of the people that are dying from COVID in the United States are unvaccinated.
Well, but here's the other. I want to come back to the UK because I don't feel like these things should be just dismissed or glossed over.
I'm not dismissing
I
them,
get it, but
we live in the United States.
I don't want to move past it. What's going on is we already covered it. Who's susceptible to COVID? Who suffers its worst effects? The elderly, right? Now, who's vaccinated in COVID? Who's being pushed to get vaccinated around the world? The elderly. Right? And in the UK, if you look at the percentage of the vaccinated population among the elderly, last I checked, it was 95+%. I wouldn't be surprised if it's quite close to 100 at this point, which means the people who would get sick and who are vaccinated are still getting sick, just less sick, and in a lot of these cases, far less sick. Those are the breakthrough cases. It's not a rationalization. I don't know how else to put it. It makes perfect damn sense if you look at it from a sort of modeling perspective.
So then, look. If 62% of all of UK, the ones that are passing away, by the way, they don't provide the breakdown as to how many are elderly versus how many are young. It just says 62%, right? And UK is almost 80% vaccinated. Then there should not be that many people. In fact, the vast majority, if not the almost totality of people that are passing away from COVID-19 should be the unvaccinated. Meanwhile, it's the other way.
Well, not if the majority of the population is vaccinated. Again, and particularly not if the most susceptible, the people who would normally be most susceptible to COVID-19, if those are the ones who are really vaccinated, which means They got the protection. It seems to be working. Some of them are still getting sick. But if you look at the death chart, it's gone down significantly. And this is with the Delta spread. This is with a lot of this stuff taken into account. My point is, admittedly, we don't have a sliding doors universe, but the assumption is things would be a lot worse if they didn't have the vaccines. But Teddy, here's the thing. I want to keep you on the line. We're over time on this segment, and I want to take us into a break because we do have callers on the line. I want to make sure we have time to get to them, too. Please stay with us if you're willing, Teddy. We'll be back in a minute with our guest, Teodros Ficre, co-founder and former editor of GuionJournal.com. We're also taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are still joined by Teddy Ficre, co-founder and former editor of GuionJournal.com. We're taking your calls, though, 202-521-1320. Thoughts or questions for us on this conversation, or for Teddy, too. Call in 202-521-1320. We've got John calling in from L.A. John, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hello, everybody.
What's going on, John?
Really, when it comes to this, the vaccine thing, I'm like him, and I'm even more skeptical and questionable because the thing that went on in Haiti, plus the fact there are other deaths that are involved that have to deal with people not bringing the vaccines to their country, plus the fact that they're pushing these vaccines, but yet they get mad because the continent of Africa wants to develop their own.
John, I'm sorry. I can't. I kind of can't make you out. It is 5:37 in the morning, and you sound drunk. I'm going to be honest.
Well, I don't know if he sounds drunk. It sounds like he's somewhere else. But John, explain something to me. Regardless of what's taking place in Africa or anywhere else, you would acknowledge that 98%, give or take, 99% of the people who are dying in the United States are unvaccinated. Does that give you any heads up of like, okay, maybe the vaccine is doing something?
I wouldn't say that because, one, I got like 14 friends that work in hospitals all across America, so I'm not going to say all that. I have access to numbers that you all don't. That's why I'm very...
Wait, John, so do you disagree with that? You believe that those numbers are wrong, that the 98 and 99% number is wrong?
We have
other callers.
We have other callers.
But let's go to other callers. But John, thank you for calling.
I disagree with that, by the way, Jamal.
You disagree with the 98, 99% number too, Teddy?
Yeah. Can I tell you why?
Go for it.
So there's the CDC has 2 different standards of measuring who is dying or hospitalized from COVID-19 amongst the vaccinated versus the ones that are vaccinated. So for the people that are vaccinated, the PCR threshold is at 28, which is so low that it could actually induce false false negatives. And for people that are unvaccinated, the PCR threshold is at 40 cycles, a level so high that it could induce a lot of false positives.
Okay, so what do you think the number is, Teddy? Let's say the number. Do you think 70%? Do you think it's 70?
I'm looking at places like Israel, where 75% of people.
No, Teddy, I live in the United States. That's where I live. So it's like, I don't know what this other stuff is. I live in the United States, and I don't, I'm not saying that it doesn't, or the numbers are different in Israel and everything else. I'm just saying, in the United States, what do you think the number is? Do you think it's 70%?
Truth is universal. So when other countries are showing the complete opposite, and the U.S. is using a different standard, and they're the outliers, then you have to start questioning whether or not people are telling the truth.
Wait, hang on. I kind of want to push back, but we got like 4 more calls on the line and not nearly enough time to take them. This is a popular topic. Brave calling in from ATL from Atlanta. You're on the line. What's going on, man?
And my hats off to y'all for having this conversation. I'm not going to take up too much of time because I actually want to hear what Teddy is saying. Teddy was making a point earlier about, first of all, hats off to Teddy for standing up and being willing to have this conversation and being brave enough to talk about it, right? No pun intended. She was alluding to something about Pfizer, about the shady history of Pfizer. I would definitely like to hear more about that. And I would note, I don't mean any insults or any disrespect, but I would really like to hear some of what Teddy's saying. And I know it's an emotional type, but you guys keep cutting in on what he's saying. And I would like to hear what he's saying. And I would just leave it at that. Again, I don't mean to be rude. I don't mean to be disrespectful or anything like that. But he's bringing up points that we don't get to hear very often unless we do digging on our own. And I would really like to hear that.
Thank you, Rafe. I don't think we've been cutting into Teddy. I think we've been letting him make his point. I think you may want more of it. And so there may be somewhat of a bias towards, I just want Teddy to talk for 30 minutes. Fair enough. But we're not going to let somebody talk on airwaves for something that I don't consider to be legit. And
well,
honestly,
we're gonna have a conversation about it.
Yeah, we're just having a conversation about it. And look, Teddy, I do appreciate you coming on and having this talk. My take is that this point of view is going to get people killed. That's my take. So if I'm dark on this, that's where that's coming from. But I do believe that we've given a fair due diligence to have this conversation, far more than any other media network that you guys would find.
We've only got so much time.
Yeah, so let's go to the next caller.
Well, either that or Teddy, any quick thoughts here?
Just for the record, I agree with what he's saying in terms of people like me being shut off from the conversation. And there's nothing that I say that I cannot back up with credible sources. So I could say the opposite. Telling people who, for example, have COVID-19 recover and develop antibodies, and then telling them to get vaccinated, that could be killing them. So there's 2 ways of looking at this, and truth is in a way, depends on.
Wait, do you believe the vaccine killed Hank Aaron?
Yes, it does. Yes, I do. 10,000 people, 6,000 plus, according to VAERS, CDC's VAERS system, have died from COVID-19.
But VAERS takes into account literally all deaths, like all causes of death.
Okay, so and you can say the same thing about people that have died from COVID-19.
No, you can't. No, there are people either with symptoms or with comorbidities who also tested positive for it at some point. But if you have the symptoms of COVID-19, it would do that in a post-mortem. But no, VAERS is literally all causes of death.
There were people that committed suicide and they were counted as COVID-19 deaths.
Okay, those sound like bad marginal cases, but those sound like marginal cases. And the fact that, do you think that that's the majority of it, or are those just problems in the reporting system? Which is how I read it, Teddy.
The majority of people that are in VAERS, I believe, to be credible. There might be outliers, but VAERS was the golden standard. Until 2020, everyone loved VAERS. All of a sudden, when things are not, lining up to according to media narratives, all of a sudden they want to discredit VAERS.
No, VAERS isn't discredited at all. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm saying that it is the vaccine adverse event reporting system. You're taking anything that hurts people, trying to put that out as lump sum data, which can then be refined and used by statisticians later on to go, okay, what actually worked? What were the effects here? Were there, how many, what compared to the base rate, what did this do? And you want to have all the data at hand so you can review that. I'm not dismissing it, and I don't think anybody here has.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying that when somebody is perfectly healthy, gets vaccinated, and they die a week later, some people say causation is not correlation. I look at it for what it is.
Okay. Well, but if you have a lot of people getting the vaccines, it's the law of large numbers kicking into effect, kind of. That's not actually the law of large numbers. But the point is, you have a lot of people. You have so many instances of a thing that you're going to see rare things happen. But we also have more callers. We got Max calling in from Maryland. Max, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I think the term you're looking for, if not for the vaccine or if not for the virus, would they not have died? That's what the term in the medical community is. Anyway, my point is, I think I don't care about the vaccine. I think vaccines work. I mean, if you take them, you're probably not going to die. I mean, I had COVID. I got sick. I had a bad case. I didn't have to go to the hospital, but it was freaky. It scared me. I've also had weird flus when I was a child that scared me. So My point is, I think the real big problem is they're not discussing whether the antibodies that people have when they recover are more resilient to the virus than the actual vaccines. They're dodging this data because they don't think it's helpful. They don't think the conversation should be had, but I believe it should be had because a lot of people who had this virus, and they're wondering if their natural immunity is working. Thank you. I'll take your comments off the air.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Max. No, they are having that conversation. I've even seen the conversation take place as these guys are talking about natural immunity versus immunity from the vaccine and whether one is stronger than the other or whether one needs support. And they are having these conversations. Whether you see it or not is something different.
I just don't think they're having. Well, yeah, but
I've seen
when he's saying they're having conversations, he means they're not telling it to us in any meaningful sense that we can make sense of. They might be having these conversations behind closed doors.
I feel you. Do you really want to get the natural immunity from the virus? That's the question. Do you really want to get the virus?
I think
that's what it sounds like this conversation is. He's like, well, I've had it. It was pretty bad, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I'm telling you, man, I am not of mind that I either want to get it, pass it, even if I thought I could survive from it. There are 30 million people that got this virus at this point that are going to have medical bills and everything associated with it. And a large number of those people are going to have side effects that are going, this kind of chronic COVID stuff that goes along. Why would you want to get this virus if you had the capability of not getting it and getting immunity from it? I don't understand that, Shane.
And if you can spread it without knowing.
Yeah.
Because asymptomatic spread, even though it's reduced from symptomatic spread, is a thing that happens. We have a couple more callers. Centurion, calling in from KC. Centurion, you're on the line. What's going on?
Entitled to it. China released it, first of all, to take back Hong Kong, and you can see that they have. They swept in there as Hong Kong police, but it was PLA Army soldiers.
So wait, just so I'm clear. China released COVID to take back Hong Kong?
Yes, and now they're going to do the same thing.
But how would COVID help them take back Hong Kong?
Wait, they'd already done that. I don't understand. How does this, this was the Hong Kong national security law, all of the turmoil of that admittedly happened, I guess, during COVID. But like, why do you think they swayed it? This is a massive international medical crisis.
4 million people dead. How does this help them take back Hong Kong? Something they could do anyway.
It's a distraction. It gives us distraction.
4 million people dead as a distraction? That's a pretty heavy distraction, especially since they could do it anyway. How would anybody have stopped China from taking back Hong Kong in the way that they did?
Taiwan, and if 500 boats are sunk, they don't care because that's what they're going to do. They're going to take back Taiwan.
You're missing what I'm saying here. How does this, meaning, let's say COVID never happened. China does the exact same thing that they did with Hong Kong. What happens? What does the world community do? Because my contention is the world community doesn't do anything.
What happened is, and you know it's true, that they went into Hong Kong, they sent PLA, said they were Hong Kong police, and took it over and arrested everybody.
But they were Hong Kong police.
But that's irrelevant to whether or not they created COVID or released it to distract from it, which are the claims you're making. I mean, you're making specific things based on it's a just so story for what actually happened. But I can come up with my own. I can come up with my own theory too. Where's any evidence to support this, Centurion?
Well, you know, it was a humanized mouse, a gain-of-function biological weapon.
I don't know that. Why do you think I know that?
We do know that.
Who is we?
Know that. We know it came from Taiwan lab. It did not come from...
It came from a Taiwan lab.
This is this is a rabbit hole, and here's the thing. We got a guest booked for next segment, and we got another caller that we've been hanging on. Centurion, I'm sorry, but I'm going to move on. Thank you for the call, though. Louise in Virginia, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Good morning. Two things for Teddy. One, can you tell us about the spike protein getting loose from the vaccine and permeating your entire circulation system, and in the long run causing bigger and bigger blood clots? And two, can you tell us about ivermectin?
Louise, thank you for the call. I mean, Teddy, go for it. I'll just hand it straight over to you.
Sure. So two things. Yes, what you just noted, the spike proteins, which are induced by the mRNA vaccines, quote-unquote vaccines, they, in theory, are supposed to stay localized in your arm. It has been shown to actually spread. And this is
shown by whom? Real quick, I just want to look into this, and then I want to respond to you. But shown by whom, Teddy?
Dr. Robin Malone has touched upon this, and he's one of the most renowned virologists, and he's the person that actually invented the mRNA vaccines. And now they're trying to discredit him, but he said that. And so did this guy named Van Bosch, who was with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and was a big-time vaccine proponent. So that's one. And as far as ivermectin, I took ivermectin when I caught COVID-19, and I'm glad I did. I'm not on here to give out medical advice, but I could just tell you from firsthand experience. But if I could just circle back to one thing, about whether or not people get immunization by contracting COVID-19 and recover. They do. Specifically, the antibodies or specifically T cells that you acquire from COVID-19 once you recover is enduring. They said up to 7 years based on past studies of SARS. This is stuff that's being completely suppressed by mainstream media, by politicians, by opinion leaders. And so, if you have COVID-19, you recover, you have these antibodies, then why on earth would you then, on top of that, get the vaccine when you don't need it? You have immunization. So, again, these are the type of information that's being completely shut out on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, because there's an agenda afoot. So it's just, I highly urge people. I'm not on here to tell you what to do or what not to do. That's free will. But do your research before you end up like Tuskegee 2.0.
Agreed. Do your research. But here's the thing with the spike proteins. We also didn't get to ivermectin, which is the second thing, but we're over time anyway. I don't see any evidence that we have increased rates of blood clotting from the vaccine so far. And it would seem like if this stuff is going to be increasing, we're going to see this in increasing numbers. Within a decade, we should see a lot of these cases pop up. And I don't want to leave such a grim issue just to time, but maybe that's what we have to do. Because right now, I don't see any specific studies backing this up. I just see claims by a couple of individuals that other people are saying are not true. And again, me as a layperson, the proof is in the pudding. You got to actually see if this stuff happens. But regardless, something we're going to have to come back to. Tedros Fikre, thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Hey, thank you, Jamal. Shane, I appreciate y'all, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Same on our end. Teddy Fikre, co-founder and former editor of GuionJournal.com. Follow him on Twitter at Tedros Fikre. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan going into our break. Coming back with Barrington Salmon in just a minute. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Live from, welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. I'm going to bring our guests in because we're running a little behind from the last conversation. We have Barrington Salmon. Barrington has been a writer and journalist for 37 years in D.C., Miami, Ethiopia, and Tallahassee. He was on the cop beat for more than 10 years. He's senior staff writer and contributing writer for The Call, Black Press USA, Washington Informer, and he's an investigative writer for Sputnik News, focusing primarily on issues around Black empowerment, social justice, criminal justice, and immigration. Barrington, thank you for coming on, and I apologize for getting to you a bit late.
Oh, it's fine. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We got into a big back and forth over the COVID issue prior, but I wanted to get into this Vice article. Basically, the Vice article is getting into this idea that they're putting sensors all across various areas, either in, I think it's Maryland in one case, New York in another case, and they are changing the data associated with this to match various cases as the cases come up. Now, this was a fascinating article because the article is a little disturbing to the degree that these guys are changing evidence. And if it wasn't for the court case where they directly, meaning the prosecution, hit that evidence, or the defense attorney hit the evidence that forced them to basically try to go through the science of what they were doing and how they were managing or massaging the evidence to try to fall in line with the court cases, then this would have never came to fruition. Those people probably would have gotten convicted. Can you talk about just justice in these various locations, and especially from the standpoint of this Vice article dealing with this technology that is being used to find or catch people?
Yeah, it's called, it's a gunshot detecting technology called Shot Spotter.
That's it.
Like artificial intelligence surveillance system. And what they do is they put these, I guess, monitors in different communities, and it's supposed to record when gunshots are fired so the police can locate where it is and maybe get there when a crime is being committed or something of that nature. But in the first Vice story that I read, it said that in Chicago, which is I think Chicago has the most of these monitors. They said that they have them almost completely in black and brown communities and not in white communities, even though gunshots and gun violence is across the city. So that's the first problem. And then, as you said, there's a guy in Chicago, I think it was, who he said he found a young man who had been shot in the head in a drive-by, and they arrested him, said that he was the one that shot the young man. And then they, as you said, they massaged the information over the course of several months to put him at the location where the young man was shot.
Yeah, right here. And because initially, when ShotSpotter recorded it, I think it recorded it, there was protests. And so they just said it was a firework. And then they said it was like a mile away. And then they moved it right here. That night, 19 ShotSpotter sensors detected a percussive sound at 11:46 p.m. and determined the location to be 5700 South Lakeshore Drive, a mile away from the site where prosecutors said Williams committed the murder. According to the motion filed by Williams' public defender, the company's algorithm initially classified the shot as a firework. That weekend, they had seen widespread protests in Chicago from George Floyd. And then, as it went to court, though, it was something different. It wasn't a firework. It was a gunshot. It wasn't this location. It was closer, meaning they were using this system not as a definitive, okay, this is what happened, this is where it happened, this is what it was, but more so, okay, we heard something in that area. We're thinking it was a gunshot, so we're making it a gunshot now. It wasn't exactly there, but we're bringing it over to this location. This guy did it. He's guilty. It's that. And that is dramatically problematic.
It's alarming. It is scary. Chicago spent, I think, what I read, like $30 million for this program, and they're in the process of figuring out. City officials are figuring out if they're going to renew the contract. But they said that there's so many problems with the data, with the reliability, that but usually that's not a good enough reason for them to kill a program. So I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago goes ahead and renews the program.
I mean, they've used this in court hundreds of times at this point. From your experience as a journalist dealing with criminal justice,
sometimes,
how do you frame this? Meaning, there are all sorts of problems that are drivers for crime and everything else, and that doesn't seem to be on the marquee to deal with. They're trying to just catch criminals. And it seems to be this thing where the state doesn't necessarily take responsibility for the people that they're creating in the state. Instead, we're looking for these kind of heroic, Batman ways. If I'm not mistaken, even Bruce Wayne had a device like this, right? Didn't Batman have a device that acoustically went through?
Yes, it did. That's the subject of the second in the Christopher Nolan, the Joker one. I mean, it's an amusing cultural reference. Barrington, thank you so much for joining us. That sounds like the kind of thing that feels like it should be illegal, which is a couple of levels of qualification. I'm not saying that it is illegal, but you get what I'm saying. This is
basically monitoring constantly.
It's mass surveillance. Yeah. Why is this not illegal, Barrington?
There are so many issues that I have with the so-called criminal justice system. The arbitrariness, the randomness in which they pull people in and put them away for God knows, for indeterminate amounts of time. This sounds illegal. It should be illegal. I don't know why the city officials or whoever it is that's responsible for this program haven't done anything to rein in this madness. Because
is there a difference between this and stop and frisk?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. It's pretty similar, and what's really troubling to me, they just assume that all black people are criminals. So they put it in black and Latino and other neighborhoods. I guess white people don't commit crime.
Well, is it based on race or based on poverty, if that makes sense? Meaning, is this in low wage or low wealth neighborhoods, or is it based on racial distinction, or is there a distinction even between those things?
I don't know for sure, but I think that it's very likely that it's both of those. But, one of the problems that we have as black people in this country is that you're automatically seen as being a criminal regardless of, where you work, what you do. That's just the common stereotype that we have to deal with. I hope something happens to change this? Because I read another Vice story this morning, and they were saying that in one city that I don't recall right now, they're paying millions of dollars to like police-affiliated groups and to the city and other places, I guess, to make sure that they continue to get the contract.
Barrington, we're going to have to close this here. I really appreciate it. And look, I apologize. The other one went a little bit long. But Barrington Salmon, he's been a writer and a journalist for 30 to 7 years in D.C., in Miami, Ethiopia, and Tallahassee. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another hour, our last this morning, of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across the four corners of these disunited states and the increasingly divided hemispheres of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Good morning again, everybody. It is today, July 28th. It's a Wednesday, and it's just after 9 a.m. Eastern. In COVID news, first up, there were about 108,775 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also about 406 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 63,248 cases per day. That's an increase of 145% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 57% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,603,433 people across the United States, and it's killed 611,128 people. The CDC has released new mask guidance, recommending that both the unvaccinated and the vaccinated wear masks at this point. We've got a couple of different clips to play here. I will start with the Jen Psaki one. This is White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki sort of explaining the reversal of policy here handed down from the CDC. Andre, let's play this clip.
Today, they're changing their guidance. They're changing their advice to the American public, their public health advice, based on evolving data and an evolving historical guidance. That virus. That's exactly what they should be doing.
Is your message to Americans who are feeling whiplash right now? Why should they trust the same group of health officials who just 2 months ago told them they don't have to wear a mask anymore inside?
Because our goal is to save their lives. And our responsibility and the responsibility of public health officials is to continue to provide updated guidance.
And that was Jen Psaki, unceremoniously cut off. I'll come back on this. I've been kind of critical of this earlier, and I will continue to be. I just don't think she's clear or specific enough. Doesn't actually convince anybody. The messaging is horrible here, as it has been. But, Jamarl, I think you're going to come on another side on that, or at least have a more qualified opinion.
No, I think you're right. I think the problem is she can't hit it directly. I mean, because what do you say? We got it wrong. We failed.
Yes.
It's like, well, we thought X. That didn't happen, and so we're changing our... It's that. And it's like, if you don't want to dig into the details of your not getting it right, then you just say this.
Yeah, well, an ounce of prevention is worth like a pound of cure, but the longer you take to cure something, the heavier it gets. And right now, an apology would take a lot of that weight off. It's a convoluted metaphor.
See, I don't think they need to get an apology. I just think they need to explain how they got it wrong. Like, I think their perspective was wrong. I think, like, their ability to disseminate the information to the public, their ability to explain it properly, the ability to push back on this. I think that part, I think the messaging was wrong. I think they came in thinking, all of these people are dead. The public clearly knows it, so they're going to take the vaccine, etc. And when that didn't happen, I think they were like, oh my God, well, now what? I don't think they had like you said, an alternative plan.
Any contingency.
A contingency
Any
plan. Yeah, I don't
contingencies.
think they had the contingency plan.
Which is idiotic.
Yeah. So I don't have a huge amount of abuse for on this. I just think she has a difficult time trying to explain how we got it wrong. And she doesn't want to have that conversation.
Because she doesn't want to get blamed by Biden or the rest of his establishment for apologizing or for doing anything that could threaten their way of approaching
She doesn't want to be
things.
attacked. Like if she comes out and
That's
does
what
what
I'm
you
saying.
want her to do.
That's what I'm saying.
Fox News is going to come out, hit her. Newsmax is going to come out and hit her. They're going to play the clip in
So
loops.
would MSNBC and CNN, I bet. Because what is she apologizing for exactly? And should
CNN
Biden
would do it.
apologize too? Should Biden apologize too?
Well, if she apologizes, that would be Biden apologizing. She's the voice of the administration. She's basically the hand of the king. Whatever she says, that's basically the perspective of the admin.
Exactly. So then MSNBC and CNN, who have been crowing and parroting Biden for
But see, apology,
months at this point.
the word apology throws me. I don't think apology
I
is
hear
necessary.
you. Apology is not exactly right.
Right. She needs to explain how they got it wrong.
Yeah.
Apology is different, if that makes sense.
Well, an apology is impossible. I think it would help. Regardless, it's impossible. All this stuff, though, it all feels impossible. Even if they were to try, if they were to do their best effort at this point, I think it's too late. That doesn't mean they shouldn't try. Yeah. Because at least seeing that, you'd have some sense that they're learning something.
You could come out and say, look, guys, we thought this, and this was wrong, and we need to reevaluate our strategy. That's not really an apology, but I get your point. It does. I think it gives you more bang for your buck, and I don't think it's wrong, even though from their standpoint, they probably don't consider it viable.
Yeah.
But they should do it, yeah.
Yes, they should.
Because I think they got it wrong.
One point
I
that
think
producer Austin brought up earlier, he posted when we were first having this conversation. And at first I thought he was saying one thing, which is where I would have gone, but then I realized he was saying something interesting and actually different and kind of better. He's saying, if Trump were still president and he were doing the vaccine rollout, would you have a similar response, a similar fear of the vaccines, concern about getting them from the Democrats as you're currently having from the Republicans? Because you got to remember, late last year, people were like, Trump's vaccines are impossible. If you do it that fast, they're going to be dangerous.
Because they
That's
kept
the critical
saying, their concern
idea.
was that Trump was trying to force them to get the vaccines out faster than they would
Faster
be
than they're
readily
safe.
available. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so that became, it's like, all right, is Trump the problem is Trump lies so much. And then it's like the way they were doing with the data, where he didn't necessarily want the data release, it just looks dodgy. And so it's like, would Donald Trump force these guys to put out a vaccine before it's ready? Maybe. He may push them. Would they do it? That's a secondary question. I mean, that's getting to institutions,
Or just
everything
the
else.
simple question, would Democrats be pushing back on it in the same way that Republicans seem to be? Although it's not just Republicans, to be clear.
See, I get the feeling that Democrats will lean more towards, okay, this is a vaccine, this is scientific, I'm willing to do it. I think it's that. So you may get some that may be bothered by it. Like, meaning, I don't think you would get the numbers of Democrats as high as they are
No.
for Trump pushing it. But I don't think you would get the numbers of Republicans that are against it that you are now.
Maybe, and that's a sliding door universe. What seems unquestionable to me is that if Trump were president, more Republicans would have taken the vaccine. We would have an overall higher vaccination rate and therefore probably fewer deaths, even though...
No, the deaths were already baked in.
I get it, but
The
we're
vaccination
still
rate,
not
I think,
done.
might be higher, though. Because I don't think for a moment that Donald Trump, like Republicans that are coming now, these Republicans that are in power and everything else, where you have like half of them coming back saying, okay, we can't keep killing our base. Okay, yeah, people need to get vaccinated. The governor, I think it was from Alabama, is like, now the problem is the unvaccinated, or the problem is unvaccinated. Because in their minds, on some level, well, people should just do due diligence and do it. If Donald Trump and the Republicans from day one were like, get vaccinated and everything else, would the vaccination rates be higher? Yes. If Trump was in office, would the vaccination rates be higher? Maybe. I don't think the deaths would be higher. I mean, it would be lower, just because the deaths were already baked in.
Yeah,
would
but
the
they've
vaccination rates be higher?
They've
Yeah.
gotten bigger since then, and the vaccines are important not just because, it's still circulating, but because of deaths, but because people are still dying from this on a fairly large scale. We've had a couple 100,000 deaths, I believe, since Trump was out of the presidency. I'd have to go back and check the precise statistics. My point is, yeah, I think less people would die overall. Yeah. That's my basic, all things being equal, looking at it. You said overall.
I don't know about that, because I think the deaths are already baked in.
It's a tangent within a tangent.
For example, when Trump gets out of office, how many deaths were there? I think it was, like 500,000?
I think less than that, but...
Okay, but let's say 450,000,
like exactly,
cut to
somewhere
scratch
around
the middle. And so then you get this thing, okay, how many people would die after the fact? Well, that's a future prediction, per se, because that necessarily hasn't been accommodated. You can make a case to say, okay, if you get more people vaccinated within the next 2 or 3 years, would it cut down on deaths going forward? So let's say the total deaths don't end up being 1 million, but the total deaths being 800,000. You can have that argument. I mean, I don't know. That gets into what was the numbers and everything else. I don't know.
It's sliding door universe stuff, and that was, again, a tangent within a tangent. I want to get back to the headlines here. In national news, and we got more clips coming. Yesterday, the House Select Committee on the January 6th riot / putsch /
It's called a
insurrection.
riot.
I'll call it a riot.
If nothing else, we know it was a raid on the Capitol.
I called it a riotous breach, which is a mouthful, and I don't like that phrase, but it's technically true, so I was using that for a little while.
Perfectly true.
It's a riotous breach of the Capitol. But that's again, a matter of some dispute here. Anyway, yesterday the House Select Committee on that riot conducted its first meeting. Some of the key takeaways included tearful testimony from the police and a promise coming from one of the Republican members saying, quote unquote, every minute of Trump's actions on January 6th will be investigated. Now let's listen to some grown men cry. First up, we have Adam Kinzinger. Let's play this Adam Kinzinger clip first, Andre. Let's go into it.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee. Thank you to our witnesses. I never expected a day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. I think it's important to tell you right now, though, you guys may individually feel a little broken. You guys all talk about the effects you have to deal with, and you talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. Democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days, how we take accountability for that.
Hooey. All right, that's Adam Kinzinger for you, folks. Let's give him a round of applause. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light. Yes, I will. This is not, no, this is ridiculous. These people are crazy. He's making political hay out of something while they're playing. He's the one, the self-pitying. I'm sorry, I'm just soliloquizing at this point. We've got Adam Schiff, also crying, also a grown man.
An Adam's thing. An Adam.
Yeah, and listen for the lack of hypocrisy here, audience, reminding you of Russiagate. This is Adam Schiff.
I'd like to think, as Amanda Gorman so eloquently said, that we're not broken, we're just unfinished. Because if we're no longer committed to a peaceful transfer of power after our elections, if our side doesn't win, then God help us. If we deem elections illegitimate merely because they didn't go our way, rather than trying to do better the next time, then God help us. And if we're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors, if they're born in another country or they don't look like us, then God help us. But I have faith because of folks like you. And Adam, I didn't expect this would be quite so emotional either, but it must be an Adam thing today. But I'm so grateful to all of you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
There you go. Adam Schiff yields back. We're not broken. We're just unfinished. Words befitting like an Islamic poet from the 14th century, like Rumi or Hafez. We're not broken. We're just unfinished. There's an almost spiritual quality to them, but this is coming from Burbank representative pushing Russiagate the entire time, talking about the death of democracy, or at least threats to it.
He spent 3 years pushing Russiagate.
Yeah, he spent 3 years.
Yeah, and but by the way, lying on a lot of that stuff. And then, I'm sorry, it's like these guys are the ones who are decrying disinformation, missing the point. So the fact that you were pushing something like that, despite that you're not having anything in it, do you think that has anything to do with the public losing faith in either media or governance?
Yes, absolutely. Headlines. Oakland City Council voted Monday to open a co-governed homeless encampment to provide shelter for 40 people in West Oakland. Residents will have a say over food runs, water access, social programs, and more. This would become the second site in the city where residents have the opportunity to work with their care providers to better their living conditions. And again, the interesting thing about this is that they basically, again, they have a say in how this facility is run. So it's co-run by the people who are living there, which, you know, if you're going to be pursuing this kind of thing, that's exactly the way you do it. But Oakland is also like a sponge soaking up a lot of the really bad part of this problem from San Francisco. Homeless people aren't the problem, to be clear, but they're having, like, this is effectively what's happening. San Francisco, the city, is overrun. I don't know when the last time you went there was, but
I've never been.
But
I know it has a homeless population.
Serious homeless problem.
I've seen a shanty town.
DC has a homeless problem. San Francisco has the worst homeless problem of any city in America. I'll just put that out there, and if somebody corrects me, then I'm wrong, but that's my perception of it right now, at least. And Oakland, you know, on the other side of the bay, just across the bridge, they're soaking these people up. Berkeley's a little bit too well-to-do. Oakland is traditionally poorer, or at least it's gotten that way over decades, and so they're bringing them in. Also the side of the Black Panther Party, by the way.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Black Panther Party breakfast program, that whole thing, it was all happening down there. But that's history. My point is, this is a rich person problem that rich people created effectively, and that Oakland is now having to deal with. And we'll see if the specific camp works.
Yeah.
In international news, Antony Blinken in India said he was worried Afghanistan would become a pariah state under the Taliban. Again, this is Secretary of State Antony Blinken. His State Department arguably had a big role in contributing to the deprivation of resources and everything that was going on in Afghanistan. I mean, just waging war, it's going to do things, and it's going to push them closer to the Taliban side of things. French President Emmanuel Macron says that France owes French Polynesia a debt for over 200 nuclear tests conducted over 3 decades, with more than 1,000 people affected by the fallout from those nuclear tests. Ecuador has stripped Julian Assange of citizenship. Officials stated there were numerous issues with the original application, including inconsistencies, different signatures, and unpaid fees. Assange's lawyer, Carlos Poveda, says due process was not taken as Julian Assange was not permitted to appear. But this would have been while he was in prison, would it not have been? In other words, he couldn't have appeared. But there you go. In Olympic news, Simone Biles will not compete in tomorrow's all-around competition where she was expected to defend her gold from 2016. This comes after she withdrew in the middle of team competition yesterday, leaving the Americans in second place as the Russian athletes took gold. Biles has stated that she needs to focus on her mental health, and the pressure of being the world's best, quote-unquote, is extremely heavy. By the way, we're going to be talking about this with producer Cordell Woodland in just a minute. Continuing on with Olympics news, Katie Ledecky won the gold medal in the 1,500-meter freestyle, rebounding from her 5th place finish in the 200-meter freestyle. U.S. men's basketball team also bounced back from their loss to France by destroying Iran by 54 points, led by Damian Lillard's 21 points. So far, the medal leaders in order at the United States are the United States, China, Japan, Russian athletes, and Australia. However, Japan and China are tied for the most gold, both at 12. Japan was in the lead earlier this morning. The U.S. currently is following at 3rd with 10 gold medals. And again, those are Russian athletes. I didn't say Russia because they're not using their own flag. They're not using the Russian flag. They're using this ROC flag, basically a Russian Olympic Committee flag, because Russia was formally disqualified from participating in these Olympics based on allegations of this doping scandal that has become a big thing in the recent history of the Olympics. Anyway, briefly in business news, Activision Blizzard employees will be staging a walkout of the company for their attempts to combat the lawsuit against them in California. The company's lawyers blame bureaucrats that are driving businesses out of the state by going after them in court like they are to Activision. Regarding the hostile work environment and sexual misconduct accusations, the claims represented a, quote, distorted and untrue picture of our company, end quote. And again, Activision, major games company that is coming under a lot of flack and scrutiny for allegations of sexual harassment. Endemic at the company. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And I'm going to go straight into our break here. We have like 3-4 clips that we were playing in different segments this morning. Our headlines are running long. Yeah. Usually we'd have a post talk wrap up here, but let's take it straight to our break. We will be coming back with Cordell Woodland, producer for this show. We're going to be talking about Simone Biles, gymnastics, the state of the Olympics in general right now. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Simone Biles, who was expected basically to dominate the Olympics in regards to gymnastics, she shocked the world on some level by pulling out of the Olympic competition. She withdrew from the competition following one rotation, opening the door for Team Russian athletes to basically win the gold for the first time in 3 decades. She made the point of needing to focus on mental and physical health, which brings up this idea of athletes and mental issues associated with those athletes dealing with the pressure of either the competition or the pressure associated with excellence. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Cordell Woodland. He's our producer, and he has been Johnny on the spot for all issues pertaining to sport and Olympics on the show. Cordell, thank you again for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
So Simone Biles pulls out. Now, I have been very angry at the Olympics because they did not have chess as one of the games. That's the first point. On the second point, from the standpoint of playing in competitions my entire life, at the very least going back to when I was 12, there is a pressure about going into a competition, especially one that you're expected to dominate.
Right.
It's one thing to go in as a challenger. Well, as a challenger, you have nothing, everything is out of the table. You have no expectation. You just are in it. You're hungry, and you're just trying to get it. And every competition at that point is just you trying to max out. When we expect this person to dominate. This person is supposed to do something magnificent and phenomenal, et cetera, et cetera. It seems the pressure just got too much for her.
Yeah.
What went on with this, basically, that she just couldn't reconcile, or she was uncomfortable with her previous performance? She was doubtful. What was the issues associated with her pulling out?
So it seems like she hadn't, in preparation for the event, she hadn't been really, she hadn't really been comfortable with her pregame routine. She wasn't hitting her landing spots. And even when she did participate in the event, it didn't go the way she wanted it to. And even leading up to that, about, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, she made an Instagram post talking about, the pressure of feeling like she's carrying the pressure of the world on her shoulders with everything that she has to take into the Olympics and expect it to be so great. And really, I would make the argument that she's the face of the Olympics this year.
She is, but she pulled out, and that's the catch. It's like, I get the pressuring on it. I get a lot of people are going to be, like, oh, that's so sweet that she's doing this, and we should coddle it, et cetera. Fair enough. She's an athlete.
Right.
And this pressure is just part of do they have psychologists on staff to talk to the athletes to get them in the right headspace when they're going out there doing this? I mean, she basically seemed to melt down at the time where she was supposed to perform. And I get it, man. Like I said, it's not the weight of the world. It's the weight of the world, and she accepts it as the weight of the world. It's basically her trying to beat her previous performance. That's all it is, no more no less. She's accepting it as something else, though. That's what I'm getting with this psychologist thing. Do they have on staff help to help people like that?
Well, I don't know if the Olympics does. I do know professional sports, they do have team psychologists, and they put resources in place for athletes to go and get their mental health together. I don't know about the Olympics. That's a good question. Because especially now, only a certain amount of people are going. Right. I don't know if they're taking a team psychiatrist there, but that would be if they don't, that would be something good to have on hand.
Shane. I was just going to say, you said it's a meltdown, but is it really
meltdown is strong
compared to Adam Schiff or Adam Kinziger? She seems completely stable. She seems rock solid. I didn't see her crying.
Yeah. I didn't say she was crying. No, I just said you know what I mean?
I was mostly trying to make a joke. Yeah. But ultimately, it's her decision. This does reflect poorly upon the United States, and I will note that this and the testimony we're seeing, it's weirdly emotional. It's weirdly immature, from people you'd expect to be like the most mature among us in some level. But at the same time, it's ultimately her choice.
Yeah.
But how seriously is her withdrawal going to depart the rest of the team, the U.S. gymnastics effort? Is this us losing it?
Well, big time. I mean, the girl who's replacing her didn't even qualify.
Oh, man.
So it's a huge drop off.
First time in 20 years.
Yeah, this is I mean, she's expected to possibly be the best ever at what she does. So, I mean, there's going to be a big time drop off for sure. There's no debating that. But I think so. To play two sides, one side, I understand. I appreciate her for stepping up and saying, I'm just not there today. Yeah. I would rather
hurt myself.
Step aside. Right. She could do not just hurt her team, but exactly hurt herself. I mean, these are some difficult stunts that she's pulling off out there.
Dribbling a ball up and down the court.
She's not doing a cartwheel, so she could easily hurt herself. So I appreciate her for taking that step back and understanding what's going to come from her.
Yeah, doing that.
Because that's a big part of it. She had to take into account what's all going to come after she decides to take herself out of the competition.
And like you said, the weight of the world.
Decision. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and not to mention, we forget, she's the only gymnast on the team still that's a part of the Larry Nassar abuse situation with the gym. She's the only one still there.
Explain that.
So Larry Nassar, he was convicted of sexually abusing over 300 gymnasts that at least came forward.
He was a big coach at a university or college, right?
Yeah, and U.S. Olympics is in the midst of trying to clean up a lot of crap that has been built up over the last couple of years. So really, she's the best thing that they have going for them right now.
Yeah.
And her biggest, she had an interview in April, I believe, where she talked about one of the main reasons that she wanted to participate, and she still does participate in the Olympics, is because she doesn't want that Larry Nassar situation to be swept under the rug.
Yeah.
She wants every time you see her to remember that with this guy.
Okay, so she has that kind of political consciousness with that. Is she doing a similar thing with this statement? Do you see this as a social move on her part? In other words, there are problems here that society needs to look at, and she might have her own reasons, but she's also kind of doing it for that purpose, or is this just her? Yeah, because I can see this is a moment where some very wise, conscientious people can start to speak up and be like, there's serious problems here that her withdrawing bring up. We need to get into those. The Olympics has this big issue. I don't know if there is an issue, if there isn't, but is she pointing at something intentionally here?
Possibly, but I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she is just, and we don't know what her mental level was even before she got on the plane to go to Tokyo. This seems like something to me that is built up. I don't think that it just happened within the last 3 days to where she just wasn't feeling it. I think this is something that she was feeling going into Tokyo, and
like,
something just wasn't right.
My body is not quite there.
And as she got there, as she got in the moment, and she wasn't performing to her ability, she's like, okay, it's bigger than bigger than I thought. And she had to act on it. So I applaud her for that. And so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. And I want to emphasize that I am not upset with her for pulling out.
I'm not
just going
upset
to
at
play
all.
devil's advocate here.
That's right.
She's the best at what she does. She's the best in the world as a gymnast right now. I mean, there are guys like LeBron James. How would we take it if LeBron James come NBA playoffs?
I'm not feeling right today.
Decides he wants to take himself completely out of the playoffs. Just no warning, no anything. Like it's a certain expectation that comes with being an athlete, that you're going to be mentally ready to prepare, and you're going to be ready to go once the lights come on and the ball is up. And so it's I want to give her and I am appreciating her, but there's a certain thing as an athlete. It's like, man, if you're going to be called the greatest and the best of the best, you gotta,
Which is why I said she wasn't the greatest.
Yeah.
I think I might even, because look, if you're the greatest, it's not just I have this physical capability that I can do this in my room with nobody watching. There's pressure. Pressure is part of it. It's like if I'm playing chess and the clock is associated with it, clock is part of it. It's not just the ability to play the game. It's also the ability to be able to manage the clock. Pressure is an aspect of competition. I don't know how you get out of competition without that pressure.
It's true. On you. It's true. But like I'll probably, and I don't know where I stand on this one, so I don't know if I'm playing devil's advocate or just having a conversation. But pushing back on that, Cordell, you brought up LeBron James. Isn't this partly because he is a man and she is a woman?
It could be.
Maybe we need to.
That's interesting
maybe we need
Yeah.
to change the way that we think about this stuff in general. Maybe what she's doing should be accepted. And if LeBron James were to want to do it, who cares? Maybe he would be a disservice to his team if he is feeling like crap. But if he feels like he needs to play, because if he doesn't, people are going to give him flack for pulling out, even though he knows objectively he wouldn't do a good job.
Jordan played through miserable situations. Jordan had the flu. He had like 100 temperature, and he still played that championship game. And so much they hugged Scottie Pippen at the end of the game because he could barely stay up on his legs, but he scored like 30.
And hit the game winner.
Yeah, it's the expectation on some level. You could say the expectation is wrong, and I don't know if it's a man or woman thing. That's interesting. I didn't even go there.
Yeah, and I kind of moved away from that. We could get back into that.
But that's a really interesting thing. Like if the same situation was reversed, it was a guy gymnast. Right. The guy gymnast said, "Look, man, my head is not there." Well, we deride the guy. He was like, "What do you mean your head is not there? Why should we accept?"
Just truck through it.
Would you push through it? And would there be the expectation of him pushing through it? I don't know.
I think there would be.
Right? So
maybe there would be.
I want to respond to both of those.
Or is it because of sports? Like basketball,
it's
payment, etc.
And it's a team sport. Gymnastics is a team sport too, but you perform individually.
Yeah.
So two things. One, on the Michael Jordan thing. Michael Jordan, as great as he is, let's not forget, Michael Jordan retired in his 20s to go play baseball because he didn't like what was being written about him in the newspapers. Michael Jordan cared so much about what writers thought of him and what was being
So
put
he
of him.
dropped out.
That was the only reason.
He pulled the same stuff. Now, it
Come
wasn't
on,
in the
wait a
middle of
minute.
a competition.
That wasn't the only reason he did
I'm
that.
not
He was
saying
the
it was-
greatest of all time. There was nothing else to prove. He had won all of these championships.
But before that reason is what I, and through documentaries that I've seen from Michael Jordan, including The Last Dance, he talked about as just like you said, he has nothing to prove, but yet people weren't satisfied.
So it's the
still
combination.
people putting things out there. And I would say it's tougher now in the social media era where you got 24/7 people talking like Michael Jordan could just avoid buying a newspaper, avoid watching, sports talk.
You can't get away from Twitter.
She can't even open her phone.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the thing here. Any sense, and we got to close it, but just sort of on the level of facts, any sense of what specifically caused this for her?
Yeah.
Like, was it coming to the event? Was it seeing social media stuff? Was it failing the first couple of attempts and just stumbling a little bit and not filling up to her A game?
So she hasn't really pinpointed anything, but just for me on the outside looking in, I think that the Simone Biles hype train was so big the last month or so, unusually big. I mean, we've always known how great she was and everything like that, but it's like leading up to the Olympics, it just really started to skyrocket. And I think that she had a human moment to where she's like, man, I mean, can I do this? Can I reach the level that everybody's expecting me to hit right now? And she got there, and mentally she just wasn't there. And to be the greatest, you got to be A1 on your mental game.
It reminds me of Britney Spears too. We were just talking about the Britney, and of course there's some specifics. I'm not saying that Simone Biles was like in this entrapment thing, or not entrapment, but her father's forcing her to do this stuff. Nothing like that. But my point is the idea of coming under mental pressure, being forced to work, going through it anyway, and having this be this lingering thing where like you keep getting into these problems. People are thinking about that. We're sensitive to that being a thing that celebrities have to go through. And Simone Biles is of course a celebrity. So I think people are more willing to accept the idea that she just can't do it, that she just has to step back. But there's still this argument.
Yeah, I mean, and even to your point of the man and woman thing, I have thought about that as well, and I think that's something that we could look at. Like, first of all, a guy like LeBron James or any guy, athlete for that matter. I mean, there was a guy, Vontae Davis, who quit. He's an NFL cornerback. He quit at halftime. He retired at halftime last season. They went into the locker room and he quit on the team and he walked away from the game and he was done. He was done. He was a cornerback.
No. What was criticism? Like, what was the
it
response?
was big time. I mean, especially in football. I mean, that's
it's a man's thing.
That's the man's
And I
game.
think that's the other catch too. If it's a male gymnast, is a male gymnast really a guy? And I know that's brutal, but you know what I'm getting at. Like, a football player is a man's man,
right?
And you don't expect that man's man to break down into
but
you.
if
You have
he
expectations.
quits gymnastics or cheerleading, it's like,
oh, he was a cheerleader. He's a gymnast. Is a male gymnast really a man? It's that. I don't know. This is brutal. I'm going to get all sorts of criticism.
Maybe,
from
but
that.
no, but I think the same thing applies in basketball. I think the same thing would apply in baseball. I think it applies. It's like, I think it is team sports, and there's totally like, it's because it's a man. I think that would play a part.
Yeah, it would.
I don't know exactly what that means, but it seems like that's pretty clear. It would play a part. And I'm saying this as somebody, I was just making fun of Adam Schiff and Adam Kinzinger, two grown men. I'm making fun of them because they're grown men, and this is how they're responding to it. I'm not saying,
But that's the expectation that grown men don't act like this. That you don't have grown men crying. Even after 9/11, the idea of grown men crying on television with Jon Stewart, it was like, oh, dude, don't do that.
And you don't have grown men dropping out, betraying their team, betraying their, the brothers, whatever.
But but like I said, I think the gymnast thing. Look, I'm joking, kind of, but I'm not joking in some respects. A male gymnast is different than a football player. It's just, I think, the expectation, what you expect of them.
It's true.
And yes, there could be a male gymnast that beats me up outside when I go outside.
What about
but it still doesn't get across the impression.
What about a male swimmer? This is another case where it's not a team sport, but it's not as feminine as gymnastics. It's not like I think of swimming as a feminine sport. You know what I mean?
It's not that way.
It feels a little bit more in the middle. It doesn't seem like if Michael Phelps were to drop out.
That aspect, I
really
can understand. It's more of a guy-woman thing. Like, we're more acceptable to a woman doing this than a guy because it's just part of the code. You don't quit.
And that's so sexist on some level.
It is. No question.
That's weirdly sexist because it's like, all right, we accept the fact that the woman is going to get weak and break down, et cetera, but we don't accept that of a man because a man is supposed to be stronger. And that's not entirely true in practice. We can break down. I do think societal expectations in regards to what is in our heads of how we're supposed to behave does matter. it's like, what is it to be a man? Yes, it's a gender role. Yes, it's a construct. But that construct has real consequences when you are soaked in that for the entirety of your life.
Well, but if we don't want it to be sexist, then the assumption is we have to respond to both in roughly the same way. You got to treat men and women in roughly the same way in whatever situation they're in. Now, which way should we treat them?
And that's my question.
That's the question.
Do we allow athletes to do what Simone did, or do we hold women athletes to the same standard that if a guy quit, we would approach it the same way?
Or should we care more about the mental health?
Honestly, I think that's the key here. These athletes, no matter what sport you play right now, I give credit to these athletes for playing in the social media era. I think that is so underestimated how big of an impact social media is right now, because you can't get away from it, and they're forced to be a part of it because they have to build a brand outside of the sport. They make themselves available, and they're able to see what everybody thinks of them all day, every day. Whereas the great athletes back in the 90s and the 80s, and I mean, you can turn off the radio, turn off the TV, don't buy a newspaper, you won't hear a word.
It's just ESPN, CNN, et cetera.
You're good.
Let's wrap. Cordell, great conversation, interesting questions. I think we actually explored this one
quite well.
We got into it. We got into the different sides of it. Cordell Woodland, producer for the show. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
And we'll be back in a minute with our next guest, John Kiriakou, who I've been seeing, by the way, all over RT this morning in our control room, talking about Daniel Hale. I believe we'll be talking about Daniel Hale in just a minute with John. John Kiriakou is a former CIA officer, also co-host of The Backstory. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern every Monday through Friday. We'll be back with John when we come back on the other side of the short break.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we're going to have a conversation on Daniel Hale. Daniel Hale is a whistleblower who leaked top secret information about America's drone program, and he's just been sentenced to 45 months in federal prison. Hale worked as an intelligence aid analyst for the United States Air Force. He pled guilty in March to retaining and transmitting national defense information, and he was sentenced in the U.S. District Court in Alexandria, Virginia, by Judge Liam O. Grady on Tuesday. In 2014, Hale leaked 150 pages of classified material to a journalist revealing the government's unmanned aerial vehicle operations. He took the documents from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where he worked at a contractor at the time. To have a conversation about this, we're going to be joined with our own whistleblower, John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou was a former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, and author of books including The CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis and The Reluctant Spy. John, this story, I really appreciate you coming on because you are the exact person to talk to about this. You yourself was a whistleblower. You disclosed the torture program, basically. You accidentally disclosed. You didn't disclose it on purpose. And in this case, Hale disclosed this. And Hale kind of made the point about, there's a quote that he gave that I want to find. He says, "I am here because I stole something that was never mine to take, precious human life. For that, I was compensated and given a medal. I couldn't keep living in a world in which people pretended that things weren't happening that were. Please, Your Honor, forgive me for taking papers instead of human life." Meaning, you guys rewarded me for killing people in the shadows. And when I disclosed the killings, the murders that were taking place basically in the name of the American public, that's when it became a problem. John, what is your take on this? I was like, that statement is phenomenal. It's like, yes, you guys are rewarding me for doing horrible, horrible things. But the moment that I come forward and saying those things are horrible, that's when it's a problem. What are your thoughts, John? How do you frame this? And what are your thoughts about this case in general, even the prosecution?
I've been very fortunate to know Daniel Hale as a friend, and I find him to be an incredibly introspective, unusually bright, and good-hearted individual. He's been telling the truth from the very beginning, that the reason he did this is because he can't live with some of the things that he did. He was trying to right some of the wrongs that he had committed in the name of national security. And he was punished for it. You know, the government made this attempt.
John? Okay, well, we might have lost him. John will be back in a moment. Look, yes, we need to reconcile a few things. I remember being on a Democratic radio station, and I made the point that Obama is locking up whistleblowers left and right. We got him?
Yeah,
Excellent.
got him back.
John,
you cut out for a second.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry about that. The government tried to make it look like he was trying to ingratiate himself with the media. That just simply wasn't true. He did what he did because he had a moral problem with what he was ordered to do. In a private conversation, he said to me, "You know what I am? I'm a child killer." He said, "Can you imagine trying to live with that, trying to go to sleep at night knowing that you're a mass murderer of children?" That's why he did what he did. And he was fortunate yesterday in that the judge believed him. The judge sided with him on his motivation rather than with the government.
Interesting. And how did that affect the sentencing? I mean, to be clear, sentenced to 3 years, 9 months by my counting. That seems,
Yes.
the maximum sentence would have been 11. I remember we were talking about Derek Chauvin. We went to you for sentencing guidelines because you wrote an article, I believe,
Yes.
over in Consortium News. On that same count here is the argument, the maximum sentence that he could have received, 11, he received far less than that because the judge sided with him. Is that kind of where you're coming from here? John?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of background to that too, Shane. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. He pleaded guilty to one of the 5 counts that he was charged with, and this was something that was ignored by the Washington Post and the New York Times this morning. So the judge accepted the guilty plea and sentenced him to 3 years and 9 months in prison, but not really, because 3 years and 9 months minus time served is 3 years and 6 months, minus good behavior time is 3 years, minus 12 months for participating in the residential drug and alcohol program is 2 years, minus 6 months for halfway house and home confinement. That's 18 months.
No, John, I get that, but did he have to give him any time at all? I mean, if he accepted...
Well,
did you give him a point?
Daniel's attorneys had asked for 18 to 24 months because that would have calculated down to time served. He didn't have to really give him any time at all, but what he did was almost as good. What the judge did was almost as good, because at the very end of it, when everybody's sort of trying to process the 3 years and 9 months, the judge said, "Okay, are we done?" And Daniel's attorney said, "Well, Your Honor, we have the issue of the other 4 charges. There are still 4 espionage charges pending that the government wouldn't deal on." And the judge said, "Yeah, those charges are dismissed with prejudice."
Interesting. Okay,
so this was a big win for Daniel Hale yesterday.
That sounds like it. And thank you for bringing that to us, because looking at it from the outside, I see this guy got almost 4 years in prison. He did good work. I'm thinking to myself, this is unjust and unfair, and therefore it's a bad thing that happened. But that puts it into some context. Here's another side of this. We were actually having a conversation, I believe yesterday, about the health, vitality, success of our judicial system, of our legal system. We were having this general conversation. And broadly, our diagnosis as lay people was it's pretty unhealthy. There's serious problems. We got into this conversation, and you know this more than anybody, but I'll close it off and pass it back to you. Here's where I'm going with this. Reading the quote that Jamarl read as he introduced you, Daniel Hale, those don't sound like words that you're trying to convince the judge. I can see how people would critically hear them and think he's speaking to the media. I 100% hear what you're saying, which is he's just genuinely speaking out of his own conviction. Yeah. But it's not like I could hear a judge hearing what he's saying, responding pretty pissed off, like you're not addressing me. You haven't. You hear what I'm saying. The judge didn't do that. Yeah. How significant? Am I right in that or wrong in that? How significant is that, John?
You're 100% right. I'll tell you what. If I had given a speech like that in my own sentencing hearing, the judge would have locked me up for an additional 5 years, because it wasn't a speech in which Daniel really expressed remorse. He expressed remorse for killing civilians.
Exactly.
But he didn't.
It's kind of ironic, and it's ironic and almost a little bit sarcastic in a way where I completely understand where he's coming from, especially hearing you describe his character. But you know what I'm saying? A judge might not like that at all.
Oh, yes. Well, I'll tell you a little bit of background there related to this judge too. I was sitting in the gallery with Tom Drake, who's the NSA whistleblower. Tom and I are good friends, and Daniel's was the last case to be called. There were a couple of arraignments. There was a child molester from Fairfax who didn't have a good day yesterday, and then there were two middle-aged guys. One was there on a robbery charge, and the other tested positive for weed while he was out on federal parole. And the robbery guy was first. He had done 18 years on a robbery, got out, robbed somebody else, did another 10 years, got out, and robbed somebody else. And he said that, Your Honor, I always used a starter pistol. I never used a real gun. I never intended to hurt anybody. And then the judge says, well, clearly, prison is not reforming you. So instead of sending you back to prison, I'm going to send you to a hospital where you can undergo mental health treatment, and perhaps we can get to the bottom of why you're doing this.
But
and
John,
Tom
that's
Drake
like
and
after
I
30
looked at
years.
each other like, what? Exactly. This guy, any other judge would have had this guy die in prison. So I said to Tom, I'm really liking the way this is going.
And this is Liam O'Grady that you're talking about.
Judge O'Grady. I had never seen him in action before. So the next guy comes up. He was in prison on drug charges for many years. He got out, tested positive for weed 3 times. Now that's a clear violation. Any other judge would send him back to prison for at least 9 months. And so he got up and he said, I have mental health problems. I was abused as a child. I'm morbidly obese. I have social anxiety disorder. And the judge sent him to a mental health facility too. So again, I said to Tom Drake, I like this judge. I mean, he seems like he's really concerned about people getting better. And so Daniel Hale came out and the whole thing started, and I was confident he was going to get a fair shake.
Oh, okay. So this is really good to hear. This is all great to hear. And you know, thank you for giving it, especially because you were there. Mm-hmm. This Friday is National Whistleblower Day. I don't know how many folks knew that, but July 30th, since I believe 2015, is National Whistleblower Day.
Ironic.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll first ask you, John, any plans for that? Anything, if we can talk for a few more minutes, any special activities? Do you guys, do the whistleblowers like meet up and, blow the lights out on a cake or something? Or
The National Whistleblower Center that's based here in Washington has an annual event. It's a big lunch up in the Kennedy Caucus Room on Capitol Hill in the Russell Senate Office Building. And it's usually attended by a good 180 to 200 whistleblowers from all across government. And we have a series of speakers. This year, Senator Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa, is speaking, and he's going to be followed by Senator Ron Wyden, the Democrat from Oregon. They're both big supporters of whistleblowers and of whistleblower legislation. And then before and after the luncheon, there's a series of seminars that has everybody from Brad Birkenfeld, the UBS whistleblower, to the Agriculture Department whistleblower that was in the news a year ago. So it's a full day of events.
But the whistleblower thing is not entirely real. I mean, the federal government doesn't like whistleblowers. If there's a real whistleblower that is whistleblowing on something either from mass surveillance, either from, let's say, basically something that the government doesn't necessarily want disclosed, they're okay with leaks. Because leaks are basically, we're going to give this to the press for a particular reason. Whistleblowing is something that the government is doing that it has no business doing. And it doesn't like that. It puts people in prison for that. They did it under Trump. They did it under Obama. The Democrats don't like to call it whistleblowing under the Trump era. Because what they would say is, they would say, well, it's different under Obama. Obama did something different. When Obama was putting people in prison using the espionage laws and everything else, he was doing it using some kind of process. It's nonsense. Well, Democrats tell themselves this stuff. It's the same thing when they were trying to either complaining about it under Trump, the whistleblowing, when they was like, oh, Trump is putting people in prison, or when they were silent for Obama. I mean, and one last point, The Intercept. The Intercept, if I'm not mistaken, is where they got this. Now, is there any responsibility with The Intercept not being able to protect their sources? This keeps happening. It was the same thing with Reality Winner. It's the same thing with Hell.
Yeah.
It's like three times where they have supposedly they've gotten leaks, and then the leaks got out to the government or the other government sources where they could prosecute and put the people in prison for those leaks. That's the only reason why Hell is in prison right now.
You're absolutely right. They outed Daniel Hale. They outed Reality Winner. They outed Terry Albury. And besides all of those whistleblowers, the two journalists that ended up putting me in prison, and one of them testified against me in my own grand jury hearing, are both employed by The Intercept. James Risen, who got Jeffrey Sterling in trouble, is now employed by The Intercept. After Reality Winner was outed, I went on Twitter and I wrote, serious question for The Intercept. Do you guys work for the FBI, or are you all really that stupid?
Exactly. And that's what I was asking. I mean, every time somebody got busted for this, I kept asking, what are you doing? How are you still asking for sources? And how do you protect your sources? Meaning, have you taken any other processes to protect your sources after one, after the next, after the next, after the next, kept getting busted and going to prison?
Yeah, and it was not lost on anybody in the courtroom yesterday that The Intercept was not represented. There was no journalist from The Intercept. The Washington Post was there, Politico, the New York Times, the LA Times, CNN, everybody was there. Courtroom was packed, but there was nobody from The Intercept.
Glenn Greenwald needs to answer about his previous organization. I'm very curious what he thinks about this.
Well, I mean, he's been critical of them, but it's kind of margin. I don't know. I don't know how much it cuts to the heart.
I've just never heard him make a comment about how they keep failing to protect their sources.
I've seen him hit them on other stuff, like the way that they're constantly asking for money, using his work. It's a little bit more protective or something like that. But anyway, we've got to go to calls. John, never enough time, but always super fun talking with you. And thank you for giving us the facts on this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great conversation. And John Kiriakou, we were just speaking with, he is a former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, also an author of books including The CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis and The Reluctant Spy. Follow John on Twitter at John Kiriakou and learn more about him at johnkiriakou.com. And check out The Backstory on Radio Sputnik every 4 to 6 p.m. every day, 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Radio Sputnik. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Octung, baby.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, it's 202-521-1320. Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. We got you on the line. What's on your mind?
How y'all doing? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Free drone signs, free danger, hands off Haiti. Iran became the 7th country in the world to invent a particle machine that treats cancer. They should at least start a tourism, a health tourism thing for people to have cancer to go there to get treated. I'm pretty sure it'd probably be cheap. Robert F. Kennedy is pro-vaccine, but pro-vaccine safety. He have numerous lawsuits he filed on behalf of his clients against Big Pharma. I think he'd be good to be on your show to explain this complicated issue dealing with this process because it's very complicated. Russia, Sputnik V, and the Sinopharm from China. I'm not hearing too much bad feedback from them. China's working on a vaccine, which they're going to be the only country in the world that's coming out with a vaccine that's going to treat the Delta variant. Yeah, something else I want to say. And, free Julian Assange, free journalism. And, James Horn. Not James Horn. Gerald Horn.
Gerald Horn, yeah.
He deals with political studies and dealing with Africa and stuff like that. If y'all ever want, talk about South Africa, if y'all talk about South Africa again, he can break it down what actually is going on in that situation dealing with Zuma.
Horn would be great. We had Horn on before.
And
He's a phenomenal guest.
I guess airing some, not grievances, but we've tried him a couple of times. We've tried to bring him on the show a couple of times, and it's just we haven't heard back in a little while. Yeah, so we're down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's been a guest on the show before for sure.
Might have just been topic.
Yeah.
I mean, he may be okay for the South Africa one. So we'll hit him up.
I'm not sure about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but I don't know enough about him to just responding that to you because you brought him up. Looking into the ion therapy, you brought up this sort of particle therapy. I couldn't find that. It's ion therapy that Iran launched. Looking into this now, it's pretty interesting. And then sure enough, you mentioned Sinopharm, the Chinese COVID vaccine, apparently is actually more effective against Delta, just looking into that. No, but I'm seeing.
Also, as a heads up, the U.S. women's just won gold 3-on-3. Producer gave us a heads up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Trying to keep tabs on what's taking place outside of us.
Wait, what was the event specifically?
This was women's basketball. The United States women's basketball just won the gold 3-on-3.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Good job for them. And with that, we are taking more calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320.
The conversation with Teddy is aggravating, and maybe people could see the aggravation. Look, from my standpoint, if you're looking in the U.S., and it has become clear that, all right, you have all of these people that are dying, and they seem to be unvaccinated. And the response is always, well, I mean, you can't believe the numbers. It's like, okay, dude, you're choosing your floor at a certain point. And whether you think that there is something problematic with it or not, I can look at the numbers and see it very decidedly clear that 90%, let's say you don't want to say 90%, pick a number, choose your number. Let's say 70%. It's still decidedly in one direction that the people who are dying are the ones who are unvaccinated.
Well, what was frustrating for me, but I like Teddy and I like the conversation, and I kind of don't, I think that these kinds of conversations need to happen way more often.
They're helpful.
They are helpful, I think, especially if you keep having them. My problem was when Teddy and I got into this original beef on the Twitter thread, the main author of this report that I started this out talking about, we were talking about absolute risk reduction, relative risk reduction.
Wait, and just so people know, you and Teddy got into a back and forth on this issue of COVID efficacy vaccines on Twitter.
Vaccine efficacy specifically because he was linking to this Lancet journal, this commentary piece basically, that was, again, I said this all at the beginning of the intro with Teddy, so I don't want to rehash it too much. My point was, the way that conversation ended was me linking to this Reuters article, with a direct quote from the main author of the article, where he's saying a lot of people are misinterpreting it and that he's still in favor of vaccines. Then I said that, and Teddy basically said, I don't trust Reuters. They're war propagandists. And then I said, but this is a direct quote. Are you saying they're lying about that? And he kind of pivoted and said, well, the person could have changed their mind. They might have come under pressure, that kind of thing, which is a just so story to fit that. And that's the kind of thing that makes me extremely aggravated because it feels like there's no end to it. I can argue and argue, and I can dispel argument after argument, but if at the end of the day it's just like, well, turns out the dude might just be lying. I don't know. He could have just been bought and persuaded.
Bernie Sanders might have gotten beat up. That's why Sanders decided not to do X or Y. It's like there's no floor.
It's shifting the goalposts. It's moving the goalposts, which is particularly maddening when there's supposed to be some parity in the argument. You know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. It's like if we are going back and forth, we need to at least agree on reality on some level, facts on some level. Meaning we can fight, we can have a disagreement and everything else, but you can't pretend like reality is not reality, that there is no spoon, especially when I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt and going down your rabbit hole, meaning I'm taking you at your facts. This is the article. Okay, fair enough. Let's talk about this article. This is the guy. Okay, fair enough. Let's talk about this guy. And at the end of that process, you're like, basically, the guy got threatened. Oh, man. that is a maddening process.
Because couldn't I say that if I wanted to be completely irrational, I could say this guy got threatened into phrasing it that way.
Yeah.
There was an anti-vaxxer at his house with a gun who wanted a scientist to write a piece backing them up, and they were like, "Dude, I need you to do this. Write this one sentence in this particularly confusing way." That's completely implausible to me, but I could bring them up as a possibility, and it's logically on a par with what Teddy was saying. Anyway, and the conversation moves on, and I feel like I've one of these things that don't get recognized, and that we're constantly shifting. Anyway, it's damn frustrating.
There's a ham sandwich in space.
But at the end of the day, what do? You keep having the conversation. And I like Teddy as a person. I wasn't being dishonest earlier. And I think that how this stuff goes is, he originally was commenting in a probably pretty mild way talking about ivermectin, and then his post on that got suppressed, and it shouldn't have. That's the kind of thing that I disagree with. The government or Facebook and Twitter, working in collusion with each other, probably suppressed this stuff. They pushed it off, which pushes him further. You know what I mean? And gives him more of a reason to believe, with good evidence, the government is suppressing perfectly reasonable things I have to say, etc. It creates this self-perpetuating downward spiral. And the only way that you could solve that is by having these conversations again and again, logically, reasonably, like we try to do on Fault Lines. We've got to close this show out today. I want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank producers Austin and Cordell. I want to thank Andre, our engineer. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank Jamarl Thomas. And specifically, I want to thank you for listening to today's show. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan signing off. See you again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern, folks. Have a great day.